good.
I call this meeting to order. Confirmation of the agenda that the Council of the Township of North Huron hereby accepts the agenda for October 22nd, 2020 special council meeting as presented. Do I have a mover? Paul, seconded by Kevin. All in favor? Carries. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, we shall move on. Before we have our first delegation, I'm going to get our CEO to speak to what's going on today and a little bit of background for anybody listening in that's not aware of what's taking place and what we're about.
Thanks, Your Worship. So just more for the benefit of perhaps anyone who's tuning in that hasn't been following, the province announced funding earlier this year, modernization funding, to conduct reviews and to look at efficiencies and achieving savings. As a municipality, we applied and we were successful in receiving $75,000 from the province to undertake this work. And as part of that $75,000, there is some funds in there for public consultation. So that's something that we'll come back to shortly. But KPMG was retained to undertake our service delivery review for us. And we have representatives here today, which we certainly appreciate. Council has expressed an interest in hearing from the consultant. So from a staff's perspective, our role has been to provide information and answer questions and assist the consultants in undertaking their work. The consultants have completed their work and are here today to present the final report to Council for considerations. There are a number of recommendations that I'm sure Katie and Chaz will go through for Council's consideration. So in terms of options, after Council receives the report, Council can receive the report and do nothing. Council could direct or proceed with public consultation on the report. The details of that is not something that's been discussed in light of the COVID, but if that was Council's wish, that's something certainly we can undertake. Council could direct staff to bring back more information on some or all of the recommendations if Council wished. Council could direct some or all the recommendations be implemented. And keeping in mind as well that there is another round of funding available, so that's certainly on the table. So with that, Your Worship, do you have any comments? And if not, we'll turn it over to Chaz and Katie.
No, thank you very much, Dwayne. No, at this point, I think we're just going to turn it over to Chad and Chase and Katie, and Chase and Katie, sorry, and we'll get this pony up and running.
Thank you, Your Worship. By way of a formal introduction, my name is Chaz Anselmo. I'm a senior manager with KPMG in our Sudbury offices. I've been with the firm for 9 years. I almost work exclusively with municipalities across the province. I've done some work out west and some work out east. Different creatures, but same challenges, even when you cross borders. I will say that much. Prior to working with the firm, I spent 6 years with Municipal Affairs and Housing, so please don't hold that against me. But I'd like to think that something that we bring to this table is the ability to speak municipal, and something that we were able to really hit the ground running when working with your staff. And I'll let Katie introduce herself.
Yeah, my name is Katie Dunbach. I'm a partner with KPMG from our London office, so just made the nice drive up here this morning. And I also have worked with municipalities for since the beginning of my 15-year career with the firm so far, both in the capacity as external auditor, but also in assisting with process improvements and financial reporting and whatnot. So thanks for having us here today, and nice to see you all in person.
So inside the presentation deck, we have an agenda that we're hoping that we can walk through over the course of this morning. Talk about the objectives of the review. Why beyond the fact that the province of Ontario was providing modernization dollars? What were we seeking to achieve? Walk through the key findings as to those themes that we saw across the organization for your consideration, as well as then speak about those potential courses of action. Where is there the potential for council to make a decision? And I really want to stress to make a decision as to just because KPMG put it inside this report doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be implemented, but it's there for your consideration. There may be some things that you have an appetite for, and there may be some that you don't. So it was really an all-encompassing look at what you do. And then at the end of all of this, we're then available for any questions you may have with respect to the review. In terms of the objectives, in that this was an opportunity to have a third party come in and evaluate and analyze and apply a bit of an objective lens, if you will, to the service offerings of your municipality. And take a look at the what, the why, and the how. And those were really the big questions that we always seek out to answer when conducting these types of reviews. And we're always doing this with that lens as to how can we potentially increase operational efficiency and effectiveness. And we do this really through two ways. The first is, to my first point, we look at the services that you provide. You know, are there areas that you're providing a level of service that either A, exceeds what we would consider to be common and or best practice? Are there services that we would identify as discretionary? And I'll get into that later on. As well as looking at how you go about in doing things. And that has been a bit of a shift for your purposes, and I hope I'm not boring you when I talk about this, but we've shifted away strictly from looking at what you do and really digging into how you get things done. Because in a lot of cases, there's a lot of value there in mapping out the workflow, the technology being used, all of those processes to identify and achieve operational efficiencies and effectiveness measures. So in terms of looking at that, and you'll see inside the report a whole chapter that breaks down a series of processes into individual work steps, looking at how we can potentially improve upon those. So with respect to the scope of work, one of the first things that we set out to do was to develop municipal service profiles. And these profiles are an inventory as to everything that you do. And they're intended to be a three-page snapshot of every service provided by the township. And in doing so, what we're trying to communicate to the reader, so that any interested party who picks up this document, is to what the service is, what value it brings, and what it seeks to achieve, and as well as the resources. You know, how much, you know, in terms of both dollars as well as people, help drive that service. And then the most important piece, and the biggest educational piece inside of those, is the rationale. And I stress that because if I were to walk the street this morning and ask 10 residents at random as to why you do some of the things you do, they would just give me the sort of the standard, well, you know, that's just the municipality, you know, wasting my tax dollars, or I don't understand why we do that, you know, this makes no sense to me. Well, in a lot of cases, it doesn't make sense to anybody, but services can be categorized into 4 different ways, ranging from mandatory all the way down to discretionary. And we use 4 categories in the development of our service profiles. So mandatory services are those that are required by the province of Ontario, or some piece of legislation says, thou shalt do this. You know, thou shalt have a treasurer. Thou may have a CAO. And what I'm not trying to do here is to talk about whether these positions are necessary, but to communicate that the Act will say that you need a treasurer, you may have a CAO, but every municipality your size does. So Dwayne, you can rest easy. But what I'm really trying to get to is when we look at mandatory and move into essential, that's where I would consider this position of a CAO to be an essential function. These are things that are crucial to the effective and the efficient, you know, administration of this corporation. The final 2 categories, and we do delineate between these two, between traditional and discretionary services. Traditional services we consider to be, in a perfect example that I consistently give, is about recreation. Because if I look across your peer group, and even if I go beyond your peer group and across the province, I expect to see recreational services provided by a municipality of your size. So that is how we do it. Because when I get into discretionary, it's those services that there's no legislation, it's it's not essential. I don't see it consistently across your group, nor do I see it consistently across sort of your weight class, if you will. So those are outliers. And I'll get into that when we start talking more specifically about services for the township, where we would consider you have discretion, and go from there. Beyond that, and I've already sort of spoken to this in terms of looking at across the spectrum, if you will, or the peer group, we did some comparative analysis. And this is to, in some cases, benchmark both your financial performance against a group of municipal peers. I will caution you, though, that comparative analysis needs to be taken with a grain of salt, in that it's point in time, and we're making one huge assumption, that everybody else is doing it right. And that is a major pitfall with comparative analysis. So as you've read the document and trying to digest some of that information, recognize that there can be variances and variables that can change a municipality's performance on a year-to-year basis. And we use it just to get a little more insight as to where, if you are an outlier, why. And try to then dig a little deeper to get that explanation. The third area of our scope of work was to do that process mapping that I was speaking about, and breaking down various processes across the organization to get a better sense as to how things get done. And this is by no means to provide sort of value judgment on workflow processes inside the municipality, because I can tell you this much. Speaking to you from the perspective of KPMG, we have probably one of the biggest glass houses when it comes to broken processes. So we are certainly not passing judgment upon yours, but providing insight as to how you could potentially reduce manual processes, get away from the use of paper, better use of technology, and whatnot. And then finally is pulling all this together to identify where there's potential for change, and identifying those opportunities both from an operational standpoint and from a service-based perspective. In terms of the key findings, one thing that became abundantly clear to us after the development of the service profiles was that the majority of what you do is because you're required to or you need to. We would consider 75% of your services to be either mandatory and or essential, leaving 25% to fall into those other two categories. And it's interesting because when we break those next two down, 19 we would consider to be traditional, and 6% of what you provide is discretionary. The interesting point beyond that, though, is that 6% in terms of discretionary services, when you throw it all into the bucket and look at it from a financial perspective, because of how childcare operates, it actually doesn't have an impact on your levy as significant as other services. So it's not as if, from a discretionary standpoint, there's a lot of room to move, if you will. That being said, though, there are aspects of what you do inside of those services that could be considered to be discretionary. And what we look at is operation of airports, trailer parks, campgrounds, things of that nature. What we're consistently seeing are municipalities shifting away from those types of operations. Henceforth, they've been identified inside this document. When I talk about the comparative analysis, both from a financial health as well as from a service-based perspective, what we saw in a lot of cases was consistency, in that no significant concerns from our perspective, whereas looking at your financial health and saying, oh, this is out of whack, if you will, as well as from a service-based perspective. Now, with that being said, there were some outliers when we looked at it from a service-based viewpoint, in that there were some significant variances with respect to policing costs, which we understand is a result of having two contracts with the OPP versus one. Your aquatics, and here's where I get back to what I was talking about trying to compare municipalities. We couldn't compare you to the group from an aquatic standpoint because you have an indoor pool and the peer group, no one did. So that by its very nature is going to then reflect in your operating costs being higher than your peers. as well as even shifting forward from a recreational facility standpoint. The one thing, though, Your Worship, members of council, is that the township appears to do very well from a cost recovery perspective for the services that allow you to do so. And that is typically an area, for your purposes, that we always have, we typically have to flag with municipalities, and that you may not be charging enough for the services that you provide. And let me stop myself there, because what I'm not suggesting is that you sort of seek out every way to increase user fees to the point where you become sort of a revenue generating machine. That's not your reason for being. What ultimately you're seeking to do is ensuring that there's balance, and that the subsidy that is built inside everyone's tax bill is sufficient to cover your needs, but at the same time not put a risk at utilization. So you're not putting up barriers to people making use of what you have. You're there to provide the service, not to generate a profit. In terms of some of the other key findings, what we have seen is that you are making good use of shared service arrangements in providing for protective services. This is something that we consistently look for. And in your case, it's a little easier to share. I will tell you this much, for those that were listening to me earlier this morning talking about being from Northern Ontario, this is not a luxury that's afforded to all across this province. I have some clients where the next nearby municipality is 2 hours away. So the concept of sharing is completely foreign to them. Just simply doesn't work. So to have that luxury and to take advantage of that is something that we would consider to be best practice, but still there's the potential to expand upon this. And we've identified that through a few of the opportunities contained within the report as to how the municipality may be able to go forward in trying to strengthen those agreements and to ensure that there's equity, if you will. And then finally, and this comes back to what we were talking about from a process standpoint, in that there are a number of matters that we have identified inside your processes that constrain operational efficiencies. And once again, Your Worship, members of council, this is not to be overly critical, because this is what we consistently find in each and every organization we work with, whether it's the private sector or the public sector. And the intent that we or the objective that we set out for, and I'm looking around at everyone's nameplates, so I don't see anyone named Sally, is to go out and kill Sally. And there's some smiles. I said this once in a larger room, and some poor woman's shoulders dropped a quarter of an inch, and they said, well, your name's Sally, isn't it? And Sally it's an acronym, and it is same as last year. And everyone falls victim to it, whether in your personal life, your professional life. Why do you do the things you do? Well, I've always done it that way. Same as last year. So in a lot of cases, and one of the larger benefits that we feel in our methodology that we've brought to this project and to all projects that we work with, and all municipalities we work with now, is that ability to go inside processes and start to flag where you can change and how you can potentially change, introducing the use of tech, reducing the number of papers. I have one municipal client who I swear must buy tens of thousands of dollars in filing cabinets just to put paper in, to never touch it ever again, to the point where they were renting space to store the filing cabinets. Not even a paper town. So you really struggle with, why are you so addicted to this? So throughout that chapter, we've provided a series of operational work step changes that, to be perfectly blunt with you, are not all, to the average resident would look at and probably glaze over within the first couple pages of reading it, but to your staff, identifying the potential to change how they do things and free up capacity. And we're not talking about freeing up so much capacity that someone's going to be looking for something to do. My experience is there's always 7 more fires on anyone's desk at any given time to put out. So if they had an additional half an hour, even a month, or an hour a month, they would be able to direct those resources elsewhere. In terms of the potential courses of action, we look at opportunities in 4 different ways. And that is, what I've been speaking about extensively this morning with respect to operational efficiency. How can you go about in doing things with what you have, but doing it more effectively and efficiently and providing potentially a higher level of service? Looking at service level adjustments. And this is an area that can be challenging for members of council, because in some cases you're being asked to change not the how, but what that you do. Alternate service delivery is, can you do things differently? Can you make use of contracting and contractor help? Different ways of providing a service. And then finally, revenue generation. So how can you increase upon the revenues that are associated with what you do? In terms of the operating efficiencies, and I've already spoken to this, I think, throughout this presentation, it really is looking at, can you make better use of technology? Shifting, say, for example, inside the report, we talk about electronic record management. We look at an overall viewpoint of customer service. And this is an area that we've identified as sort of an emerging trend across the municipal sector. As communities grow, as communities change, as the demographics change, as new residents move in particularly what we're seeing, across a number of my smaller municipalities, they're experiencing an influx of new residents into their community, and what they're bringing with them are their expectations from their previous municipality. And that can present a challenge as well as an opportunity to the new host municipality, if you will, because your infrastructure may not be built, and I mean by infrastructure, I mean your customer service infrastructure, may not be built to meet their needs. Now, what I'm not suggesting is you jump at every time a resident says jump. That would be problematic at the best of times. But it really is to sort of shift the focus as to how do you engage with your residents, how do you track issues, things of that nature, just to ensure that at the end of the day, the township can be confident that your processes are solid with respect to customer service, and that you're doing within the best of your abilities to meet the demands and the needs of your community. When we talk about service level adjustments, this is where we look at the potential decisions for council with respect to whether or not you want to be in the businesses that we flagged inside the report. Do you want to operate an airport? Do you want to be in the business of providing for campgrounds? Looking at your museum, looking at the police contracts, are there ways that you can save money by deciding whether or not you want to be in the business or not? And listen, it isn't the role of KPMG to say, go and divest all of these assets. It really is then a decision of council. But at the end of the day, what we looked at is based upon common and best practice, as well as emerging trends in the sector. These are areas that we are seeing other municipalities actively get out of those businesses, hence why they're flagged. From an alternate service delivery perspective, this is really looking at corporate systems, if you will. And the areas of particular interest from our perspective around information technology and human resources. These are critical services inside any municipality. And in particular with a municipality of your size, these are areas that we focused upon to identify where there's the potential to do things differently, but be able to provide a higher level of service from an internal perspective. The only way you find out that you're not doing HR well, unfortunately, is when something goes sideways and then you pay for it. As well as, from an IT perspective, you also find out that you're not doing things well when systems go down, and then you find out how reliant you are on these. And I'll tell you this much. I left Sudbury yesterday afternoon and I got to the city limits and realized I had left this at home. So I had to double back, because if I don't have this, I mean, some would suggest I might be useless at the best of times, but I'm truly useless if I don't have this in front of me. So, to that extent, these are areas that we have identified from an alternate service delivery perspective for council's consideration as to, albeit they may not be sexy, they're critical and essential into how you go about doing things, because things have changed, and these, as things change and things evolve, these are two areas that we consistently work with municipalities around, potentially increasing capacity. Not suggesting that you're going to hire, you know, an IT technologist tomorrow, nor are we gonna suggest that you need to go find the highest and best paid HR professional to bring inside your organization, but providing you with a bit of some strategy as to how you could up capacity to ultimately ensure that you're protecting yourself as a corporation from risk. From a revenue generation standpoint, there are really two areas that we sort of keyed in on. One is, and I think of importance, and was something that was raised by a number of members of council during those initial consultations, was the concept of user fees and the shared service arrangements that you have. And really ensuring that you're not out there as a municipality providing free lunches to your neighbors. And I can respect that there is always some trade-off between municipalities as to access to service. But at the end of the day, if that subsidy is growing on your levy for the provision of those services, and you've got those who aren't paying that subsidy, it may require a harder look as to what the balance should look like in ensuring that you're protecting the ratepayers for the Township of North Huron and not for the ratepayers of the County of Huron, if you will, where you have people jumping the line. So, with that, Your Worship, members of council, concludes our presentation, and now we're available for any questions you may have.
Thank you very kindly. I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions or comments. Go ahead, Trevor. Paul, did you have your hand up too?
Not yet.
Okay.
Thank you, Reeve. Sorry for my walking in the middle there. I was dropping children off, so tends to be the problem these days.
Yeah, I have three at home.
The one thing I would say, it's more of a comment as it relates to the report. The one thing that I took out of the report was, you know, based on what we have been talking about at council and staff over the past 2 years, nothing in this report, in my mind, should surprise anybody. We are already talking about a majority of these service level delivery stuff. You know, these are been suggestions already at this council already about how do we make these either more efficient or are we even in the business of having them. So, you know, from a perspective, that's I think a positive for us in the sense that, you know, we're already down, you know, maybe 25% of the way of going through this process of understanding these things. Some of these are I would say, long-standing services that have been in this municipality for probably as much as most people have been in this room alive. I'm the exception, obviously. But obviously, in my mind, that is one of the things that, you know, we're taking a harder look at when it comes to. So I was really impressed in the fact that that's, from a council perspective, not only this council, but the council before was still looking at these things. A lot of this new council inherited some files from the old council that hadn't got through the path. So we are honestly, I would say, majority that way through dealing with a significant amount of these. I was also very impressed about the mapping, the process mapping as it relates to, you know, that just gives staff, you know, an opportunity to think about, you know, how they do things and the way they do them, and not necessarily say just because that's the way we've done it. It gives somebody a second look to say, you know, maybe that is an option. Obviously, there could be an option where it doesn't matter what you map and how you map it. You just may not be able to do it for whatever purpose or whatever reason. So I was very happy to see those two things within the report. I took note also about your comment about the comparative factors, because I looked at them, and in one slide I would say, oh God, we're really good, and then the next slide say, isn't that just the opposite of what I just read the page before? So it was one of those things where I took into consideration that those as little as exactly what you indicated as a grain of salt, in the sense that I was really happy in the sense that we looked at, from somebody other than our auditor, we've got a report that says that we're in a decent financial position as it relates to the services that we provide. Everybody says, well, an auditor is supposed to be independent, but when you have an auditor that you've had for 15 years, it's hard to know whether you're actually getting true knowledge about what your books are saying to you. So it's nice to see, something from a report that indicates that, it's a secondary look. It just, you're looking at something that is important as the financial perspective of the municipality. So from my perspective, I was very happy with where we are in the process as a municipality as it relates to this service delivery review, and how we are already down that path with the support of staff and CAO and council, how we are already looking at a majority of these issues and trying to figure out which ones do we want to, because with every decision there's emotion attached to them. And I say as council have been very good at trying to alleviate the emotion in the decision and try to make it as a business decision as possible, because obviously some of the reasons why we have some of these services is because emotion came into play when they made the decision in the first place. So I think ultimately that's the part for me as a comment reeve, members of council, that I'm truly impressed about where we are at as opposed to a municipality as it relates to the service delivery review. Is there some difficult answers or difficult questions to be still had and difficult answers? Absolutely, and I wouldn't expect anything less. When you come into a municipality council, you're not expected to make the easy decision, you're expected to make the hard ones. So I want to thank KPMG for the work that they've done. Obviously, wouldn't have any urge to say thanks to the government of Ontario as well to allow us to get this kind of review, because obviously this is a lengthy process, and it's something that is not cheap. It's not and it's not a shot at KPMG or anything. It's just, it is an expensive endeavor to get a service delivery review done. And when the province of Ontario is offering that option, why wouldn't any municipality take it up on them? And I think we've done a good job in the sense how we take it from here, and the recommendations that we put in place are only on our desk. So I thank you guys for that.
Thank you, Trevor. Anyone else? Remember, one of these folks drove all the way from Sudbury, the other one from all the way from London. Let's give them a little bit of. Go ahead, Chris.
I'll give you a good shout out. My daughter works for PwC, does exactly what you do, and I always heard about you, and it's good to experience your work. You did a fine job. It was nice to have someone, a corporation on the outside, looking in, because like Deputy Reeve says, we have an idea of how we are and where we should go. It's really good to hear your views, and that's a shot in the arm to know, oh geez, yeah, right, this is what's happening in our municipality, and we better look long and hard at it, or totally agreeing with what we already see. So I don't know, I really appreciate the work you have done. What sort of scares me a little bit is, do we do an overall an acceptance of it and go ahead and do it? That's a bit too much for me. I'd like to sort of cherry pick, and I don't mean just a little bit here, a little bit there. I mean, oh, okay, administration, yes, I really got that one. We can get some efficiencies there. Yeah, we need to look at the most important part, because it'd be pretty daunting to do everything, because it's a huge amount of information that came our way. But anyways, it was a good experience. This was terrific, and thank you very much.
If I may, Your Worship, the last chapter, if you will, inside that report provides you with some food for thought, if you will, from an implementation standpoint. And to your point, you're right. It would be daunting for council to say, as we're just going to take this report on an omnibus approach, take it all, and we're going to attack. That would be chaotic. And as much as we talk about decision paralysis inside the report, going all out is just as, it could result in just as much paralysis because you're just gonna choke the system out. It really then is, to that point, is to going forward is ensuring that this becomes a living and breathing document, and that these opportunities then, as a group, are prioritized and then put onto smaller plates. You don't go to a buffet with a platter and load up the first plate because you're done. If you want to taste it all, smaller plates. At least that's what my doctor keeps telling me. But her and I disagree on so many different things. So, but to that point, we try to provide you with some additional implementation guidance as to how you can experience a higher degree of success based upon the number of these that we've conducted, and where we found municipalities have some difficulty, if you will, sort of taking that next step. Because I think you've already raised some of those themes, the concept of emotion, the concept of this is a lot of information to absorb. Well, then how do you balance that and try to move forward strategically? So we hope that the document will also assist you in that way.
Thank you. I'm gonna go with Paul and then Kevin.
Yes, through your Eve, thank you, Chad and Katie, for your picture. As was said by the other councillors, we have looked at some of these. I'm just wondering if you could just go to page 40 and it's a highlight there, capacity benefits and financial benefits. I just wonder if you could just digress a little bit
Sure.
on your thinking on that.
So when we talk about capacity, that's where it's when we look at benefits with respect to capacity, when I'm talking about opportunities, say, with respect to IT and to HR, is to how can you potentially invest to increase capacity and sort of provide greater benefit to the corporation as a whole. When we talk about financial, that's where inside the document you can go to that last column in terms of anticipated benefit, and you can see where there's potential dollars attached to changing a service. So that's how we delineate between the two.
Okay, thank you. And page 21, it had those big things on there, the high costs. I see that we're going to digress in those a little bit. But there's also a thing came up there about things that we should be getting rid of. It came through, I thought sort of clear to me, was the airport and the parks, which one has been dissolved already. But also there's the museum there. Could you mention on that you said something about third party? Could you just digress on that a little bit, please?
So with respect to the operation of those, in that what we're not big fans of is saying you're either in or you're out. Just either do it or get out of it. Because there's no finesse, if you will, in that. What we have seen other communities try to do is they go and they try to find a third party to go and operate this, where they may provide them with a bit of a contribution that's lower than what it costs you to operate, and say, hands off, this is yours to operate, which means the operating wins and losses are yours, not ours any longer. So that's how we're looking at when we start talking about that way. It's more of an incremental decision-making model versus just saying whether you're in or you're out. And that's why we positioned a few of those in that way, whereas the only way in some cases you can test the value of a service in some cases, and I'm not trying to present a sort of negative imagery here, is you need to point a gun at it. Because in a lot of cases, then you'll find out whether residents value something or they don't. When you start talking about closing things, and I'm not a fan of that. I consume recreational services in my community by the bucketful. I make use of what my community offers me, so when they start talking about changing it, I get vocal, right? But I'm not the minority. And that's what the difference is, in that you're in a difficult position when you have to try to weigh cost versus service. And I've stolen this from someone else inside the firm, so I won't take full credit to this, but there's typically two camps inside every municipality. There's advocates who are, I don't care about the cost, give me the service, and there's accountants. No offense to my colleague beside me, but the accountants are, dollars and cents. I don't care about the service. Your challenge as an elected official is trying to find that balance. And so when you start looking at services such as those that we've talked about, that incrementality way of potentially changing, it really then provides you to potentially still offer the service, just in a different way. And then if there's nobody who steps up to the plate and says, I want to do this because there's a business case to do this, then your answer becomes a little clearer as to whether or not it's truly valued inside your community. You have a little more weight to say, well then, maybe we don't need to be in this any longer. So that's why we structure them in that fashion, is to provide you really with that ability to take small steps to get to a conclusion rather than just say, that's the conclusion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Kevin?
Thank you, Reeve. I'd like to reiterate too that I've gained much knowledge from the report. I found it very well thought out. My question is, I'm going to kind of appeal to your knowledge base of being able to, or doing this for a long time and and having the luxury of having presented to many councils and then going back years later and redoing it for someone else and revisiting those places to see what has worked and what hasn't worked. Just in your opinion, in the scope of what's in the report, is there anything that you would pick out as being high priority and highly likely to be successful in the report, like, good, better, best, as far as just to give us an outline of what our thought process might be, picking on your knowledge of what you think we would be the most successful at attaining first from this, the highest priority versus, on the way down, kind of give us a step by step of what.
Yeah, no, through your worship, that is an excellent question. It's a question that we're consistently asked. Usually it's the, how many of your clients have implemented 100% of the opportunities put forward?
No.
So, to that, that usually is a result of where they are, sort of the experience of that municipality. When we do these, in some cases, we're doing them because something dramatic has happened. I had one municipal client, they lost 30% of their tax levy because of a council decision. Council thought there was 30% gravy, if you will, inside it, cut it, and they almost went Greek, or they ran out of cash. So when we did the review, different circumstance, right? So, but sort of getting back to your question about priority, and one of the things that, and listen, I'm not trying to paint in gray here, one of the things that we pride ourselves with is everything that sees paper, if you will, and here I am talking about use of paper, but anything that's contained within this report, we would consider to be realistic and attainable. It's not as if we are presenting you with opportunities that are for a municipality of 250,000. Nor are we going to suggest things that are going to have like a 20-year window of implementation. Where we see though the greater success in a lot of cases are those that involve sort of internal focus, because it's council working with staff to achieve those things. Where, in my experience, there has been hesitation to implement, and this is by no means a criticism of your counterparts across this province from an elected official's perspective, is where you start talking about service level adjustments. And it's difficult, because the moment that you turn the switch down, your phone rings. Simple as that. And that gets back to my point about value. So, in terms of prioritizing, I think in a lot of cases it's identifying those internal functions, those matters that would increase capacity and allow things then inside to run more effectively and efficiently, because in a lot of cases then it frees up capacity to start to look outward as well. So you always fix your house type of thing. And listen, what I'm not suggesting by saying that is that your house is broken. It's just, in some cases a matter of tweaking, changing things. The real benefit to the process mapping, and with all due respect to council, unless staff needs something that's outside the budget, it's really staff's to run with to implement those changes. So you can have two streams of change now, potentially working, collectively at the same time. Now, you don't wanna overburden either side of the organization, both politically and administratively, but, the channels then can run concurrently to implement change. But to your point, those pertaining to operational efficiencies are probably going to be easier to implement than service level adjustments, because that's gonna require some time and some consultation as well.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go to Mr. McBurney first. And then
Yes, I also would like to thank you, and I thought it was a good report. I have no questions, but what I have seen in the last while, since I've been on council, is that our staff is going in the right direction, small steps, and at least we're going steady. And the goal, I guess, would be just to make sure we get accomplishments out of it. Anyway, I have no other comments than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. Retro.
Yeah, I did have a question about, who you interviewed in the actual report was just municipal staff, council. Was there any communication to the general public in the municipality at all?
Through your worship, no. The concept of, the idea of consultation was something that through the project team we talked about, and then COVID hit. And I believe, as your CIO sort of put in his introductory remarks, it may be something that council wants to have that discussion about how you go about in positioning this with the residents.
Yeah, and I guess the comment to that for staff perspective, and that I think this, in my mind, this is a perfect opportunity, because the second part of this meeting is budget. We're going into a budget scenario here where we're gonna be talking with community about dollars and cents and services. It only ceases to amaze me about, exactly as you said, if you were to say we're gonna cut something or change it, we've got this room is not big enough, near is the arena or any other building in North Huron that would be available for the public. But the public, in essence, has had this now report for almost 2-3 weeks now. Be 3 weeks, because council's had it for 3 weeks or 2 weeks. I don't know if any councillor here has heard anything from anybody. I know I've heard one thing from one committee that's currently working on it right now. And Councillor Heffer's on that committee, and he's asked some pretty good questions about that right now, and it's not a surprise, it's the museum. It's a discussion that's being had right now. But, one of the things is that, I've heard it so many times, this is my 6th year on council, and unless you physically change something or say it's gonna close or gonna sell it or do something, it's like crickets. You don't hear anything until they get their tax bill. And then it's like, Jesus, they're for 2 months, you can't get them off the phone. So what I want is for more of the people who are not here and that are people are watching remotely, we need information. We need, we're gonna take the accountant side of dollars and cents and match it to the feelings of the municipality, and not take all of it all based on emotion, and not take it all on dollars and cents, but try to find that balance. And the only way we can find the balance is we're 7 people. We're 7 people within the municipality of 4,000. We need some information from people on how they feel about this report. This is a lengthy report, it's an informative report, but I think ultimately this tells us some things, and it should tell residents some things as well about what this municipality has to offer and what we're doing right, and what maybe things we need to correct. But we need to continue to have that dialogue with the residents and get some, don't get criticisms. Provide me a solution. Provide me something that I can take towards a solution that we as council can help work with staff to get a resolution that can be satisfactory to everybody. We need all the information. And what I say to people, because we've had a couple of a couple of people concerned about this report. One in perspective, saying, well, they don't have any skin in the game. They've said something, and they have no skin in the game as it relates to KPMG. And I'm saying, well, that's fine that they don't have any skin in the game. That's one part of the thing. We want somebody looking out that doesn't have any emotion and provide us some recommendations. The people who have the emotion, give us your feedback on what your emotion is and how you tied to it and how it's going to make you feel as it relates to what are we missing as to what this is offering our municipality. And we as council then have all of the information to make a decision that is respectful to the community as a whole, and not just the small minority or the people that has no skin in the game, or everybody has every emotion tied to it, because that's the problem that councils run into. They make decisions on emotion and don't look at the dollars, and they break themselves. And then they have to go the other way. So I just think, as another comment, Reeve, I think this report, as KPMG's mentioned, is a living document. It should be on the table every time we talk about budget, every time we talk to communities about what service levels we have. This report should be prime target. If somebody wants to argue or complain about the service levels in the municipality, send them this report. I personally believe that is the most important thing that we can do to keep people informed about this municipality and how we operate and what we do and things that we have.
Kevin, if you don't mind, I'm going to speak first. So following what Deputy Reeve Sipes just said, our next on the agenda is the airport. So I'd like to, for the people that are watching and may want to watch in the future, I'd like to talk a bit about your decision on the airport. First of all, I'm not sure what you know about it, so I am going to give you the Reeves report, and I'll try to be brief. The airport is not in North Huron. It is in Morris Turnberry. We pay taxes to Morris Turnberry to have the airport there. We, North Huron, pay $40,000 a year if you don't include the rent of the land, and I'll always argue that point. So we pay, North Huron, taxes to Morris Turnberry, and we pay the full $40,000 to keep it going, to keep it upgraded. If you take into the rent of the land that we could be using to fix streets or concessions, it's actually $100,000 worth of tax revenue that's paid into the airport. And I believe right now we have one person in North Huron using it. At one time, for many, many years, we didn't have anyone using it. For many, many years, we had everybody from outside of North Huron had a little place there. I'm not sure if you're aware that we're in negotiations with our neighbor Morris Turnberry, and the offer we put on the table is that we will supply them with water and sewer to the north side of Wingham on their land so they can develop industrial land and a tax base. On the south side, what we're asking back in return is that they hand over the ownership of the airport and the 400 acres, and actually 200 more that's with it out to the four corners. So a total of 600 acres. 400 of that North Huron owns, okay? And it's in Morris Turnberry. So what we're suggesting is, because we own the land, if you were to give that over to us in return, we could then build industrial, commercial, and residential on the 600 acres. It's a prime location. And North Huron has paid $1 million to have the water and sewer out there, so it's a perfect fit for all of us. They have the water and sewer to the north, and they can hook into it right away and start helping people like the Greens. We would have that 600 acres out there for our growth, to help our tax base. Just a win-win all the way around. Not costing either one of us a penny. Not a penny. Not losing a penny on taxes or anything. Perfect setup. you're suggesting to sell it, but I'm not sure if you knew we had that on the table, because if we keep that for right now, and we did make that deal, then we can really move ahead. On the other hand, if we were to sell the chunk in the middle of it, and I'm not sure how much we're talking about in acreage, that all of a sudden inhibits us from doing what we want to do as far as any growth. At the same time, even the fact if we sell the airport, at this point in time, I believe, and maybe Trevor could help me here, our city council asked Morris Turnberry for
An airdrome.
yeah, and so that nobody could build a silo at the end of the airport. But they never gave it to us. They said, no, we're not interested. We didn't even do that. So right now, if you were to sell that airport, somebody could stick a silo, and I know it sounds funny, but it actually happened down by Sarnia. You could stick a silo up at each end and the airport would be useless. So having said that, you've suggested that we sell it, but I'm not sure if you knew the proposal that was on the table with our neighbors that we're trying to work out. And since this is going to be the next subject we talk about, for the public that's listening in, could you just tell us your thoughts on it and how you came to your conclusion, et cetera, et cetera?
Through your worship, and with respect to proposals that were put forward, this is information that, to my knowledge, wasn't provided to us. So, with that being said, though, in terms of the airport, the opportunity looks at its closure in some case. Its closure, not necessarily, when we talk about divesting yourself of this asset, it's one of two things. One is, first of all, it's, the opportunity there is to close it, which then still means that you keep the asset. To the again, sort of looking at that incremental approach again, whereas you could then ultimately sell it if there's no need for it. So to the extent that you're in negotiations with your neighbors as to this potentially being as part of a land swap, obviously selling the asset doesn't make much sense, but to that extent, operating the airport is still a question as to whether or not council wants to be in the business of providing operating dollars.
Thank you very much, because as the council is well aware, I'm not interested in running, as a Reeve, and just speaking on the Reeve's behalf only, I'm not interested in running an airport. There is no profit. At one time, we all had to go to meetings, and the airport was put there specifically for Mr. Levan, who built the foundry out there. But I think we're all starting to realize that we don't have to, we can just do it this way now a lot. So the world is changing, and we have to change with it. So thank you very kindly for that, and I do agree with you, we should just simply leave the airport closed from the Reeves desk. Anyone else like to speak to anything? Go ahead, Kevin.
Thank you, Reeve. Several places in the in your report there, you keyed on the of the accessibility that we've applied for grants and subsidies from the government being lower than most other municipalities. I wonder if you could tell or elaborate on that a little bit. Is there certain areas? Is it is it environmental grants? Is it operating grants? What are we? If you could break that down, what are we not going after successfully? Through
your worship, this is what it sort of comes back to what I was talking about with respect to point in time analysis. So this is analysis based upon information that you provided the province with in 2018. So to that extent, with respect to grants and success rates, that's akin to looking behind the curtain. If this was the Wizard of Oz, you're looking behind the curtain. In a lot of cases, I really wish I could provide you with a definitive answer as to success rates with respect to grants. Unfortunately, that sort of involves another party, being the province of Ontario, who in some cases will provide grant dollars to municipalities, in other cases they don't view your application as high as they view others. It's a competitive-based approach. I could speak to that subject for hours and bore everyone with my opinions on that, but I digress. So again, this is where we saw, in terms of point in time. So to be perfectly honest, we don't have that multi-year analysis contained inside the report to say that this is an ongoing trend.
So it didn't signal out any one portion of government that we weren't maybe possibly not looking at?
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Well, not seeing any more hands. Would the staff have any questions, concerns, or comments on what took place? Go ahead, Donna.
Yes, thank you, Reed. So I guess to follow some of the comments that were made, so it was a good process for us to go through, so we really appreciate all your work on that. And some of the struggles we came up with was finding exact comparators, because that's exactly how staff have promoted things to council, is that for a place our size, with what we offer, is not easily compared to anywhere else. And so then that's why our tax rates, the cost per residential taxes and other taxes, and things like the number of staff, the number of buildings and such, is not easily compared to someone else. So you can't look at other municipalities with a 5,000 or under population and think we're the same, because we're completely different. So that was something I think we had those discussions on, and as I said, I just wanted to reiterate that point. Again, as Councillor Deputy Reeves reported, we're not surprised about a lot in the report, but possibly comforted by the fact that we think we're on the right track, and that we've had, the things that we report to council, we verified basically that we're headed in the right direction. So that does make us feel much better for sure that we're on target. And I guess the main thing is this is preparing us for step 2. So there is more funding available, and is in a small municipality, the two things we lack are enough staff resources and enough dollars to implement these types of things. So the report will give us a good base. There is the next round of funding, and so this report will certainly, I think, go a long way in order to be able to help us to be successful in the next rounds of funding, because we have the proof or the backup to be able to justify that. So we do really appreciate that from our point of view as well. So yes, it was a long process, and as I said, a lot of hours on telecalls and Skype and whatever. But anyway, I appreciate that. So thank you.
And if I may as well, thank you to you and Kirsten and Dwayne and all of the other staff who participated in the sessions. We found your candidness and willingness to work with us was really great, and helped us put this all together within the time frames that we were aiming for. So thank you.
This, through your worship and for members of council, for your information, this was, as to Donna's comment, a lengthy process. This was a requirement to redivert resources away from core functions to talk to consultants for a few months, which can be tedious at the best of times. So we do, again, just to echo Katie's comments, really want to acknowledge the time and the effort and the energy that your staff have invested in this. We couldn't have done this without their support and their expedience to responding to questions and requests for information. I will say, given how many reviews that we're working with across the firm, was quite high. Whereas some of our other municipalities aren't responding to us by any means with the same sort of urgency, as well as with the completeness to that. So once again, thank you to them, and to the township for providing us with this opportunity to conduct the review for you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm going to go over to Kurt.
Okay. With respect to page 43, you've outlined one opportunity for a maintenance fee for the building department. How many other municipalities have implemented such a fee, and is that fee brought in through the Building Code Act, or is that more of an administrative fee that the municipalities?
Through your worship, the application of a maintenance fee it's varied. It's not something that you consistently see across the board. Some municipalities will, and some will not. Some don't, in some cases, want to pursue it because they see it as just as another task, and some is another administrative duty. But others will apply that with the intention, not so much to generate cash, but to get people to close permits out. So it's more of a housekeeping measure as to, so to your point, you're under the code, you're allowed to operate at full cost recovery. This is another aspect where you can justify the fee through the act. However, it's something that is typically an administrative charge, whereas if you wanna keep a permit open for longer than a year, you know, it's an additional $100 to $200 to the municipality. And it also gives you the ability then to sort of say, okay, it's been 12 months, where are you at? If it's done, great. You can close it out and it can move off into a different category inside your systems. So it's really what some municipalities have implemented to try to keep an eye on open permits. As
Thank
you
you.
can imagine, some municipalities, particularly those with growth, as they start to look at how many open permits they have, it can become somewhat nightmarish. So.
Kevin?
Thank you, Reeve. I have a question either through Dwayne or the staff supervisors. In the report, as you mentioned earlier in there, about the ability of an IT or human resources addition. Does staff agree with that assumption that would be something that would be beneficial and smoothing out the operations, as they've indicated in their, just yes or no,
Yeah,
if
through
you
your
agree with
worship.
it, that's all.
Yeah, through your worship. So from an HR perspective, certainly, and we had put some money into the 2020 budget to look at a shared services arrangement for human resources. COVID kind of took its effect, and subsequently here we are. But from a staff's perspective, we certainly see a need for, we haven't identified a need for a full-time person, but we have identified a need for at least a part-time individual. From an IT perspective, we currently have a contract with a third-party provider. That's something I think at some point that we, in terms of we'll look at that. There's been some growing pains with that. Partly, I think, though, is in terms of because we had that service in-house, we had that expertise in-house, and we went to a third party. So every IT provider has their own way of doing things, and so for the first, I would say year and a half or so, there was some bit of growing pains. I think things have got better, but just going back in terms of through the second round of funding, and I'm not sure what Chaz or Katie, if you have any thoughts or comments on this, but depending on where we go with the service labor review, you could look at hiring or bringing in somebody to do a third-party review of IT in terms of looking at the systems and the processes. And that is, there are firms out there that do that. And unless things change, the eligibility projects for the phase 2, the indications are that we could make an application to undertake that review of the IT. I don't know if you.
Yeah, through your worship, to that point, our understanding of the municipal modernization program was that it was structured to be a 3-intake program. Intake 1 sort of providing dollars for this type of work. In subsequent intakes 2 and 3 are going to be real pertaining to implementation. So this opportunity such as that, I think to the point of your CAO, would potentially align with the provincial's objectives with intake 2 about going a little deeper and doing more of an implementation type of review with respect to information tech.
Thanks. I'm gonna let Vicky follow up on that first, then we'll go to Trevor.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through Your Worship to Councillor Faulkner's question. From a excuse me, from a staff perspective, as one of the departments that has a large staff component and is about to grow even larger with the addition of daycare services, I strongly agree with the fact that we do need HR support. The legislation is changing, and the legislative changes, you need someone who can stay on top of those legislative changes, but also look after our staff, their needs and questions. That is taking up quite a bit of time from the supervisors, the managers, managers and the directors and things, there and help us in, ensuring that we're in compliance with the changes and things and or whatever's required. In terms of IT, I'm just speaking on behalf of Recreation Department, specifically the complex. We have a lot of needs there in terms of the systems that are in place for online registration, for the different software packages, the security system, the access system, the card swipe system in the building up there for members to go and access different areas and things like that. The systems don't always run smoothly. They are aging too, and so there's lots of calls that are having to be made to the third-party provider. And because we don't have someone who is on staff, sometimes that means that we are down. And then we have to change our processes in order to deal with that until they can come and repair it. So it's not the most efficient in some ways. And I can speak as in most recently, we were down at the front desk for 2 days. Because we're not their only customer, and that's the thing. So it's something we have to weigh with, our delivery of services and programs and things. But when something like that happens, it does cause us to drop things, to have to deal with this and change our processes until we can get something repaired.
Go ahead, Deputy Reeve, second.
Yeah, so the HR component is not new. I don't think it definitely isn't new to Dwayne as he came into when he came into the municipality. The HR function, I don't suggest that we've ever done really well here, just because that's been the function of somebody else doing another function. They haven't been dedicated, so it's a piece of the side of your corner of your desk, and hope you don't get any employee complaint or any issue that might resonate to an exorbitant amount of cost. So I can agree with that. The shared service arrangement for HR is in my opinion, is the ideal approach to go, just because we're not big enough to support a full-time HR generalist. As it relates to IT is the same boat. We had an IT person, but he didn't do IT completely. That person did clerk work. He had a number of different tasks, health and safety, and a number of different tasks in his portfolio, which when he left, ultimately we couldn't provide an IT 100% of the time. So ultimately it was a struggle to find what that was. So that was why the consultant approach was taken. Would it be important to now look at both of those approaches and find out if there's jobs that we have in the municipality that can commingle? The problem is to find somebody who has all those benefits as well as IT is going to be a real challenge. Because you usually are an IT person or you're something else. You're not an IT person and a little bit of HR and health and safety, and unless you're going to train somebody to do that. And so, it may be approach where, shared service arrangement with those types of things may be an issue as well. So I think based on the conversation that we've done in-house and now consultation with IT, that is absolutely one that needs to be reviewed again, that says, what are the cost benefits? What do we need to do to make sure this works? And, we have had, we've got 2 successes right in this room about shared services. Like, we have success stories right in this room about shared services. We just need to have more conversations and bring on, the County of Huron and those other lower tiers to say, here, we're all in the same boat. Let's call a spade a spade. We're all in the same problem with when it comes to HR and IT. We're not all big enough. So the smaller municipalities in the 9 that don't have an HR person need to have some conversations together as it relates to that, because I can guarantee when it looks at, if you look at all 9 municipalities in the lower tier, surely to God, you can have enough IT work and HR work to satisfy the job requirement of somebody in that role. And not have a concern about it. But I think you're absolutely right. Staff has made that comment. Dwayne, I know, has made that comment before, that we need to, that those are processes that we need to look at.
Thank you. Carson would like to speak to this.
Yeah, so just as it relates to IT, so as we touched base on previously when we were talking about the restructuring of the front office, so the report did make a recommendation of where IT kind of fits, and we've kind of moved IT away from Dwayne under myself more now. And just for the benefit of council, we completely acknowledge that there's not full-time hours for IT, but what in the initial discussions that we've had with Continuit, what we've been working on is trying to build up our capacity here. So some of the things we would normally have to call a third party for in the past, we're trying to build up that capacity so that we can easily do those things here as well, right? So whether it's a simple thing such as the phone, like restructuring the phone system, or stuff like that, because of the transition and it's still playing itself out, we were required to instantly pick up the phone or send an email to support to get those things addressed. We're looking to be able to do more of those in-house, some of the kind of more standard things, so that we do have the internal capacity that in an ideal world, when the phones are down, we can address some of those issues here, and then hopefully get away from the need to rely on the third party so much. And I guess the other point that I want to make is, for a little while still, you are still going to see the effects of that transition. We have been working with Continuit to align with their other municipal providers, and as Dwayne mentioned previously, that's one of the problems. Is what you'll see is every IT does things a certain way, so things take a little more time right now because things are still trying to transition to the way that works best for Continuit to align with the other municipalities they provide, where, for example, some of the programs that we have, for whether it's server backups or something like that, are different than what's being used by Continuit with their other municipalities. So there are certainly things in the works that are in an ideal world will make us more efficient, but just for the benefit of council, that's kind of where we're at with that.
We're gonna follow that up with a comment from Vicky,
Thank you, Your Worship.
or maybe questions.
It's just more comment, but just on that and things, the other thing to keep in mind when we're talking about positions and becoming more efficient and things like that is, as we become more computerized, the need for IT increases. And that's something that we need to take into consideration, whether it's bringing on the new website. That's going to require some maintenance. There's all these different things. We're bringing on new recreation software. There's all these different things that are occurring. Even with our records management and things, and all of this requires someone to look after. There's backups. There's all kinds of things that go on behind the scenes, as well as the phone systems. I can't tell you how many times the phone system goes down over the complex because it's just a constant thing there. I've resolved to the point that it's a ghosting system and things, but there's constantly issues with our systems and things that need to be looked after. Pen pads, updates to the computers, the laptops, desktops, servers. It's across the board. So the need is growing as we become more computerized. The other thing I just wanted to comment on is, I've heard the comment made a couple times here about we don't have the need for a full-time HR person. Coming in as an outsider, I've been here a couple years now and things, there's things that are being done by staff, administrative staff, that really should be done by the HR person that could be transferred over that position, like maintaining vacation records, sick employment contracts, things like that, as well as we just recently discussed the legislative changes about part-time staff, and vacation time. We have to track part-time staff's vacation time now as well. So there's a lot of things that are coming on board that we need to consider. Payroll is looked after, in the finance department. That could become, something that an HR person does, as well as benefits, management and things like that. But another point though too is that you'll see in some municipalities and things is that health and safety goes with HR quite often. So I know our new clerk is, and with the recent restructuring, but also with all the things we've been dealing with and trying to deal with communications and planning, and you know, the growth that we're experiencing and demands we're experiencing, his plate is quite full. He's having to do a lot of juggling and things, so health and safety may be something that you want to consider in the future if and when you are looking at an HR.
You're fine with me.
Yeah, I know, but seriously, again, and again, just touching on that, it's the changes, it's things are becoming more regulated and legislated, and we need to ensure we're in compliance. So, thank you, Your Worship.
I'll just follow up a bit with that. Yes, compliance is very, very important for keep us out of lawsuits, and I'll bet you the CEO could have conversations at the CEO meeting at the county level with other CEOs about shared services. Anyway, carrying on. Any other questions, comments, concerns from anyone? Not seeing any, I want to thank Chase and Katie for coming out. We appreciate the long journey you made to get here. We are right in the middle of everywhere, as you've gone from one end to the other. And thank you very much for all the work you've done. And I'm sure Council is so happy to hear that our staff was quite cooperative. And it was a good learning experience, and it is a living document that we will move forward with. So, thank you very much.
Bernie, I guess for
Thank you, guys.
for direction for staff, like, is there anything you guys want us to bring back? Or, like, so as Dwayne said at the beginning, basically, it's open for wherever you guys wanna go. Whether you want us to bring back additional information, whether there's things you want us to move on right now. I guess, basically, you have the report in front of you, so from staff's perspective, any direction you wanna provide us would be good direction at this point. And obviously, under the report section, there's the airport report, so that could be a different discussion. But anything else from the report that you'd want to provide direction to staff on, we can certainly make note of that.
So I'll throw that out. It doesn't have to be today. You've got time. I mean, this is a long document. We need time to think about it. We've had a chance now to hear from the authors of the long document, so you have time to think about it. But again, maybe before our next council meeting, if there's any concerns, I will throw out that I would like to see the airport closed and not put up for sale at this point until we've finished our discussions with our colleagues over at Morris Turnberry. I think it would be in long-term beneficial to us. We can always sell it another day. Is there anything anybody would pointed out there that they would like to? I'm going to start with Chris, Paul, and then I believe Trevor had his hand up.
Yeah, Chaz and Katie, you brought up where we have departments sharing a function, parks. I think it'd be good for us to have reports from each of the departments that kind of give their views of how it's going and how each of them could see how it could be more efficient, you know, whether I went that way or I went that way. You know, I think as council, we need to know the feelings. Like, we can't just say, well, it should all go this way. You know, we can't say that. But we need this information.
Okay, thank you, and he's documenting it. I'll give him a second, Paul.
Okay. I'd just like to have time to digest what we've just taken in the last hours. You say bring it forward in the next meeting. I'd really appreciate that. You gave us a lot, so.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Bit of a fire hose approach, if you will.
What we could do is put it on, I guess, for the benefit of council. So what, if that's what you guys are wanting to do, we could, in the other business section of the November 2nd council meeting, we could put service delivery review recommendations on there, and basically under that other business section, you guys would be able to have a discussion on the recommendations now that you've and that way you'll have time to kind of digest what Chaz and Katie have said to you today.
That's a great idea. Trevor?
So part of my thoughts was that was the intention of today's meeting. That's why we gave the report to council 3 weeks before, so that we could review the report, have some comments to it as it relates to KPMG's thought process through the report. But from that, provide recommendations as to what staff are because some of these are gonna have budget implications, probably all of them. I personally don't think from anything as it relates to operational, like anything that was documented in KPMG's report as operational, that has nothing to do with me as a counselor. That's something that staff and the CAO should be having discussions at senior management about. It has nowhere should I say to council or to staff, though I think parks should all be done in direction or public works versus recreation. You guys figure that out. It has nothing to do with me. Policy wise, we need to decide on. We need to have a discussion or at least a solution about the alternative services model. That's policy driven discussion that I think we've had. We've got the airport on our list at the next report that's going to be talked about. I think we need to make a decision on what we're going to do with that when we get to that report. I think there's the other thing I think that we have, in my personal opinion, I believe that we should send the recommendation from the KPMG report as it relates to the museum, send it to the committee. Send it to the committee for their review, their thoughts, their perspectives. What do they don't like about it? What do they do like about it? Because in my mind, the operation of the museum, we've sent it to them to provide us a solution to operate the museum in a new location. But everything that we've been heard is one thing. It's the municipality's going to staff somebody there, and it's going to be a rotation. The artifacts are going to change. This is new information. I think the committee should look at it and look at to see whether that could work. It may not work. What is that? It is the committee of the recommendation, or the recommendation of that committee that's coming to council is determining whether the museum moves at all or it's closed. So I think ultimately, in my mind, that's where that decision should lie. No different than when we had the House and Dam Committee meeting. That recommendation came here. We've requested this committee to do work about operations. Where is it going to do? How is it going to look like? All that stuff. In my mind, that committee recommendation should come to council with a suggestion. Until we get that, I say the budget stays the way it is. Because I don't think that's going to change in 2021. Like I don't see that committee coming back to council and a change during COVID in 2021 to change that service level. So from my perspective, those are the types of things that if it's a committee related, if it's a committee related issue that's already on the table, I think we have to deal with that.
So if I may pick up there, thank you, Trevor. Paul, as the chairman of the committee for the museum, thank you. Are you fine with that? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you kindly. Okay.
Yeah, and I think the other two options are, I know the two things that are in the report that KPMG's offered is one is about policing. We can't do anything about that right now. We're in a contract. We're in a contract until the legislation either abolishes the contract or the contract gets ended. And do I agree exactly with what their opinion is? Absolutely, I agree with it. But we can't do anything about it at this point. So I think some of those recommendations that are in there, I think we have to take those recommendations and understand what that means and what year it's going to impact, and then take those. And I think staff can help provide clarity to council. But from what I've heard from the meeting for this, why we've waited this long was staff wanted to know what they needed to deal with in 2021's budget, because if they're not going to deal with it today, then 2021's budget's gonna go and come and go, and it's not gonna be included. So, I don't know, operationally, staff need to decide what they can do in 2021 and put that in the budget. That's a staff discussion, I don't think that's a council discussion. The service conversation, I think like you said, we're having the conversation today about the airport. We've sent that discussion, I think in my mind, we sent that recommendation back down to the museum committee for them to bring back. And then policing, I think, is what it is at this point. I can't recall the other one that's on the docket, but I think ultimately, those are the ones that had the biggest, those are the two that had the biggest big budget implications today, was the museum and the airport and the operationally of the operations. So unless I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, staff, because I've read the report a couple of times, but that's what in the council, that's what I envisioned when we took the meeting on the 5th, and we moved it, or the 19th, and we moved it to today. Because we were going to provide that recommendation today, not wait another month. Because staff needed the budget now. Like, they need to work on the budget now.
So, we can continue with that, but at the same time, we can bring that up under other business at the next council meeting.
For sure, yeah. Deputy Recyp is right. That was the intention of today, to kind of have that lengthy discussion without being constrained for time in a regular council meeting. And we are working through the budget process right now. So, I mean, as I'm sure the Director of Finance would say, the earlier the better for when we can get answers to those things. But I know one of the biggest things that needed to be addressed was the museum and the direction for that, because right now, basically, that committee is kind of just halted to see where council wanted to go with things. And a meeting is scheduled for November 5th right now, so I mean, we can definitely take that recommendation from the service delivery review report to that meeting, and I'm sure Vicky and Councillor Heffer will report back with kind of the feedback that's provided on that recommendation.
Okay, thank you kindly.
Reeve, and I think the only other thing I wanted to mention is that I think based on some of the discussion that we've had today, I think it definitely a report as it relates to IT services needs to be completed. Like a report providing, understanding where we are now, where we've been, the future looking of what that looks like, and again, staff provide council understanding of whether we need to bring it back in-house, not bring it back in-house, whatever that case may be. I think that report needs to come at some point, because that is going to have budget implications, whether it be positive or negative, depending on if you remove the contract, and then, because there could be a savings, there may not be, I don't know.
Deputy Syke, would you follow up with that, with saying that also bring a report back from the CEO, and he has meetings with, at the same, just to make it one time, when he has conversations with other CEOs to see if there would be interested in other municipalities joining with us to put a picture together where it's financially feasible for somebody to take the job as well as having it.
Yeah, I think that report is all encompassing about what the options are, what opportunities do we have.
Yeah.
I think personally what I'm hearing though is there's a disconnect of us saying that we don't have enough work to people, to maybe staff thinking we do.
Yeah.
So I think that, and I think I'm hearing it both not only on the IT side, but I'm also hearing it on the HR side.
Absolutely.
So I think what I'm hearing is if there's a disconnect between what senior management have belief and what council believes, we need to conversate that into one discussion and figure out how we can maintain what that looks like.
Yes, through your worship, so we're working with an HR consultant, and you're going to be receiving hopefully very soon new draft policies. And in doing so, we're also looking at a new payroll system where some of the stuff that's currently done manually is gonna slip off. Hopefully, the plan is that will then be done electronically, which I think builds on Chaz's point in terms of that we're looking to, I'll call it, modernize some of our HR operations. But certainly there is identified need for HR assistance, so, but we'll bring a report back.
Okay, thank you very kindly for that. Okay, again, going back to Chase and Katie, thank you very kindly for coming out. Thank you for all you've done for us. We do appreciate it. And we did it in good weather too, you noticed. No snowbanks,
No snow, hey.
especially
All
for the
you can ask
Sudbury
for.
guy. I appreciate
Snow tires
that.
go on Friday. so.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you again.
Thank you, Trevor. Can you switch with me? I just have one.
Safe drive back.
Take care, thank you.
Take care, thanks. Okay, so we're gonna move on to 5.1, which is the Richard W. Levan Airport. Because this has, there's lots of discussion as it relates to the KPMG report. I'm gonna go out a little different than what we've normally done in the past, where we, recommend the motion, and then get a first or second, and then have a discussion, because there could be lots of discussion that changes the motion, in my mind. So I'm going to, out of thoughts here, and I'll take council's direction if they think it's wrong that I'm doing this, but I'm gonna get Jamie to discuss the report, and the report that she's gonna provide, before I get the motion to accept the report. Any issues with that from council? Jamie?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So the report that I have pretty much goes over the operations of the airport. And it's being presented today in combination with the service delivery review, as it does make recommendations to divest from the airport. So to provide you some background, the airport is situated on 448 acre parcel of land. It is comprised of 77 acres of airport, 235 acres of agricultural land, and 136 acres of the woodlot. Attached to the report were two other reports from 2016 and 2018 that were the history and the background of the airport, which were feasibility studies. One was internal by the previous rec director, and the other one was from Huron County Economic Development, I believe. As part of the discussion today, going through the operations of the airport, there is one part-time employee that currently works out there, and they just go out to make sure that everything's all right. Public Works still does clear off the helicopter pad for Orange. And then, not this year, but hopefully next year, the cadets will resume their flying lessons or gliding lessons, which is usually just one day a week for a few months in the summer. The airport currently has a number of agreements in place, which includes the air cadet agreement and Apex helicopters as well, that rent out for 2 hangars. There is no longer fuel sales at the airport. That was discussed last year, and that stopped occurring. In the report, it does present the motions that council passed for the fuel sales, as well as the options discussed in the airport feasibility studies in 2016 and 2018. Some of the options for consideration are to continue the operation of the airport without fueling services, because they're available in other airports in Goderich, Hanover, Kincardine, and Owen Sound. Lease or purchase a card, no. I don't think the card lock system is feasible at this time. It's very expensive for the amount of fuel that is sold.
but, we could look into selling fuel once again if you so wish. Develop a long-term plan to actively build the airport. This would kind of go back to the economic report from 2018 from Huron County. Look for partnership opportunities for the operation of the airport. This could include arrangements with organizations, and due to the fuel, if we decided to have that again, we would need to discuss some site requirements with Morris Turnberry for that. Like KPMG suggested, divest of the asset. This would involve the severance and sale of the airport to an entity interested in operating a private airport facility, sell the agricultural and natural environment lands. At face value, this would constitute an immediate source of cash flow revenue. However, the full long-term cost of operating the airport and capital improvements would be entirely borne by North Huron ratepayers. For this reason, it is operationally prudent to only consider this option after divesting of the airport facility. And then the final option would be to sell the agricultural natural lands and reduce the site to a heliport only. This would provide services for Orange and Apex, depending on what their requirements are. There are also financial impacts written within the report. They vary in there, and the cost of operating the airport is largely offset through the lease of agricultural land and occasionally by harvesting of the woodlot, which will be occurring probably next year. It is due to be completed again. So the $68,000 towards the airport annual operating cost would usually leave a deficit of approximately $20,000 per year. The practice of applying the agricultural lease revenue to the operation of the airport was brought forward by the airport committee back in 1995, and any of the operational deficit is then funded by North Huron ratepayers. The 136 acres of forested area, which was harvested in 2006, had a net revenue of $199,000, which aided in repairing the airstrip. So possibly we would be able to acquire similar funds next year once the woodlot has been harvested, which could be put towards, again, operational costs. So future options would be to, depending on what council decides they would like to do, it would then impact what types of financial, I don't know what the right word would be, financial impacts would be to the township. So if your option is to divest in the asset, there would be terminations for the agreements that the township right now holds with Apex and possibly Orange as well. So in the agreements, it states that the township would, one, purchase of the hangars at fair market value, purchase of the hangars at depreciated capital cost, or in the event that agreement on fair market value cannot be reached, the cost of physically removing the structure shall be shared by both the tenant and the landlord. So we would have to move those hangars for them. So I'm gonna stop there and let you guys discuss those options and what you wanted to move forward with.
So Because as I read the actual requested motion here, it really is gonna require another motion after this motion, because it really doesn't, it really have to be amended, because it doesn't really give staff any direction as to what they want. So let's first of all, Reed, do you want to switch back? It's fine by me either way.
No, you go ahead, you can finish that.
So maybe because it's gonna need adjusted anyways, why don't we get some comments from council? Kevin, did you have Councillor Faulkner?
Yeah, through you, Deputy Reed, to Jamie. Do you know what, if we close the airport, well, basically we've got it closed now, but if we stop to maintain it for any length of time, because it is under jurisdiction of the federal government, any aerodrome, if there would be additional costs if we were to reopen it? Would all those permits that we had to get an airport, would they cease to exist? And in the future now, like maybe there are more requirements for aerodromes now than there were when this was first implemented, and possibly just being grandfathered along. Just for, well, I'll get that question answered first.
Through Deputy Reed's site, to Councillor Faulkner, I am not sure regarding whether we were to remove any of our licenses or other requirements or things that we have in place. If we were to then want to reopen it as an airport, I know we can put them on hold, and if that's something that route instead might be beneficial, if it is considered, or if it's a thought that maybe you do want to go back and open that back up as an airport instead of just terminating those things altogether. That would be an option.
The basis for that question was we have no idea as to the future of development out there, if at such time that we did have access to industrial land out there, whether that would be something that would be of a benefit to going forward in bringing commerce to that area. That's good, yeah, I think I'll end there for now. Thank you.
Is there any other questions from councillors? Councillor Heffer?
Yes, through you, Deputy Reed site. I was just curious, this question is for Dwayne, has anybody offered to want to buy the airport over since you've come into play here at the municipality?
Yes, so we have had contact, but just in terms of just the airport lands, not the entire property. Whether or not the seriousness of the inquiry, I can't speak to. I just know that there was an interest expressed and asking if the municipality would be interested. And the response from staff was to bring that to council, and that party has not obviously or presented to council as expressing that interest. So again, I can't speak to the seriousness of it. But just going, if I could, back to Councillor Faulkner, my personal thought in terms of if council was interested in divesting of the airport from a saleable perspective, I think it'd be in best interest in terms of we would maintain the airport. You could sever the airport itself from the agricultural land. The agricultural land could be sold separate from the airport. But I would suggest that you want to continue that airport, all the licenses and the permits and all that sort of stuff, from the standpoint that if you do have an individual who's serious about acquiring that airport, they're not going to be interested in acquiring it if it doesn't come with the licenses and the permits. So from that perspective, I wouldn't suggest that we relinquish any permits or close down the airport in its entirety. And further to that, just in terms of the orange piece does service the community as a whole. So if you were to decide to sever the agricultural land from the airport and you did sell the airport lands in terms of the 77 acres separate from the 235 or 136 acres, that you would make arrangements, I would suggest that that Orange would continue to have, that would be part of that sale agreement, whereby that heliport or the helipad that they would be responsible to maintain it and provide that service. And then in terms of whether or not there's any financial compensation around that, that's something that, could be discussed at the time, if that was the desire of council. But certainly the Orange and the heliport pad certainly serves a broader community interest. I think in terms of the airport itself, the activity on the airport as of recent has been very, very low. I think it's 38, I think I read in Jamie's report, 38 flights. And going back to the Reeves point, I mean, I can't speak specifically, in terms of how many are North Huron, but, in terms of, again, it goes back to that recreational aspect. As I understand, and there's been people here who've been here longer than me, the airport was originally established from a business, commercial, corporate perspective. And, I guess the question is, does the airport still, which supports the local economy, and I understand that. And I mean, and I've heard comments made that, need to keep the airport to support the local economy, but is it supporting the local economy? I mean, it's costing North Huron dollars, and if it's supporting the local economy, certainly I would suggest it's justified. But if we don't have businesses or corporations where it's supporting the local economy, or are you, again, subsidizing or supporting people's recreational interests, which goes back to the earlier discussion we had regarding things like the trailer park. So I'll just throw that out there and for thought.
Any other questions, Councilor Bailey? Go ahead.
So I would pick up on that. As I've said, I don't think the municipality of North Huron is big enough to be in the airport business. And I think there is opportunity there if we can make a deal with our neighbors, which would be a great deal for all of us. I don't have a problem with selling the airport. Whether we sold the airport or not is immaterial, because it's still going to be something that if we did take the land over, that somebody else is running, and that's the whole idea. We want industry to be there, we want residential to be there, we want highway commercial to be there. So it's not gonna change anything if we did reach out and see if whoever's interested in it was seriously interested in it, or put it up for sale, however we have to do that legally. But the rest of the land, the agriculture land, I think we should hold on to for at least a year. If we haven't made a deal in a year, sell it. Let's be honest, it's in Morris Turnberry, we should divorce ourselves from it. We should take the money that we get from that, selling that land, and we should buy a plot of land on the edge of Blythe that's for sale, and a plot of land on the edge of Wingham that's for sale, in East Wawanosh, which is North Huron. And the taxes then go to North Huron as we build. No more building outside of our community if deals cannot be struck. So I personally would have no problem with following up on, as long as we're not gonna get into $100,000 cost, figuring out what it's gonna cost to sell it. And if somebody wants to buy it, put an offer in on it, see if it's a reasonable offer. We have no air protection for them. That is not our jurisdiction. They have to know that up front. We have that money sitting in the bank and we can do what we want with it. But keep the agriculture land around it. Do not sell it off yet.
Councilor Palmer.
Yeah, Deputy Reeve, I echo our Reeves comments. Yeah, I would think we should divest ourselves of the airport proper, 77 acres. And as far as the farmland, you know, the rent that we would receive there's an economic bonus there. So we would be making money every year as opposed to like the taxes that would have to be paid. But again, it's money in the bank. It could be sold at any time. If we needed the dollars for some project, great. It's just money in the bank, and it just seems like a smart idea for us.
Any other councillors that wanna, Councillor Faulkner?
Thank you, Deputy Reid. Just a comment. It's, yes, it's an expenditure. The airport is an expenditure. We can save money by not maintaining it during the off season, the snow removal and such like that. I do agree with the orange being a very large component of safety in our community, of them continuing use on it. For what it's cost, what the upkeep cost of it with not having to plow it anymore, it's just a piece of pavement out there that will always be out there until it needs replacing or repair. But I think it's an asset for the next 2 years as we go forward with our vision of what could be done with that property. I think it's more of a plus than a minus, that piece stay with that property just for now, until we do have more confirmed commitment of what our future holds with that property. I just think that expands the possibilities. I think if we were to divest ourselves of that property, we would be hindering ourselves going forward, just in the short term. Because I don't think the future of that piece of property is clear yet as to making a decision of this magnitude on an asset that really isn't going to cost us that much if we stop maintaining it. It's just our taxes that we have on the property is not gonna change much. If you take 77 acres off of 400, it really isn't gonna drop the tax rate that we have to pay the Morris Turnberg. So just for the near future, I would be in favor of just ending the maintenance of it during the winter time. We have people that use it without having to have any maintenance. The RC Jets come in there. They were talking about expanding last year to if we would allow them to bring in camping on site, they could make it twice as big. And 2,600 glider landings and takeoffs from that thing is quite a large amount for the Air Cadets to have to find somewhere else to do that. Since they do rent that, they do pay us approximately $4,400 in 2019 to rent it. I think that would be a large expense on theirs to have to recoup other places, and we could actually lose the cadets if we had to move to a different aerodrome. That's just my opinion on it.
I'll go with Councillor Palmer and then Reeve Bailey.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Reeve. I guess the ghost in the closet for me is it's still a registered airport, and Jamie just left, but it's to Jamie.
My computer died.
Do we know when it's life expectancy of the pavement? Like when Transport Canada comes along and says, okay, thou shalt replace or whatever, resurface? Like I'm concerned about that. I don't want to have that surprise, because that would be an expense, huge expense.
It's in the report.
Do we know when? I
It's in the
didn't
report.
see it. Someone know?
Sorry.
The life expectancy of the runway.
It depends. So on use and like the amount of traffic on it. So the heavier the traffic, the more it's used, then the quicker it will need to be replaced.
Okay.
So asphalt usually has a life expectancy of 25 to 30 years. So if you do if the airport all of a sudden starts to get very busy and there's more flights in there, then it might need to be closer to the 25 end, or if it isn't or stays consistent, then maybe the 30, 35 year kind of time frame. But depending on what asphalt costs in the next 20 years, it might be a significant amount of money there that will need to be invested.
Just to follow up on that, it's not a cost we need to worry about in the next 2 years.
No, it's not.
It's not a cost that this council is not gonna have to deal with. Sorry, you're
Vicky first. and I'd
providing
like to
Vicky,
speak.
okay, Vicky, go ahead.
Through you, Deputy Reeve, I just wanted to comment on the RC Jets, comment that Councillor Faulkner brought forward about their expansion and camping out there. North Huron does not have the rights or permission. We don't have the rights to allow camping out there because it's in Morris Turnberry, and Morris Turnberry does not allow. It's not zoned or permitted to allow camping on that site.
So one of the concerns that has been brought out, and Reed Bailey's brought it up a couple of times. Staff have brought it up at any time. Anything that we want to do at that location is all required to be gone through Morris Turnberry. It's Morris Turnberry's land. It's in Morris Turnberry, or it's our land, but it's in Morris Turnberry, so we have to follow the regulations and rules of Morris Turnberry. So part of the concerns is that has been discussed multitudes of times by Reed Bailey. It's discussed been multitude of times from staff about what people want. People think that they come to us and request something and we can just apply it and allow it. But we are required to follow the rules of a municipality that land is under. So we own it, yeah, but we are renting it to those people. It's no different than anything else. We have to follow those rules. Councillor Faulkner, do you have something else?
Yeah, just an information. It's interesting that they don't allow camping on the airport property in Morris Turnberry, where it's been indicative of the last 2 years that I've watched the RC planes there, that camping has been on the farm next to it in Morris Turnberry.
But it's a residential property.
The farm property, that's
Correct.
But you were saying that they don't allow camping in, is it just because it's an aerodrome, or
That's
just they don't
correct.
allow it in their township?
Through you, Deputy Reeve, it's because it's the airport.
The airport is zoned a certain way, which doesn't
Yes.
allow camping.
Could they camp on the farm property? Portion of that?
That's private though. I mean, residential private makes a difference.
Sorry,
Well,
Councillor,
there's
you're
400
talking
acres.
they camp on the agricultural land that we own.
Yeah.
That's a discussion they've never asked, and that's a
I was just
conversation.
I was just wondering whether it was just because it was the airport, or whether, I just found it was, I thought maybe it was just because they weren't allowing camping on it when they allow it next door on their own property. So.
No, through you, Deputy Syke, it's because it's an airport, and
What if the airports are closed?
it's the zoning.
Okay,
It has to do with the zoning
okay, thank you.
and things, so, yeah, and then in terms of the agricultural land, I'm sure
The farmers would have a problem with
Yeah,
that.
the farmers would have an issue with that.
Reed Bailey?
So I'd just like to follow up with my colleague here next to me. I agree with him as far as whether we sell or keep the airports immaterial. If we want to keep it, I'm fine with that. I think it's a great, again, because we're hoping to someday turn that into, and again, if we don't do it shortly, it's not gonna happen, but for the purpose of this year, I suggest we leave it as status quo. And if somebody steps forward and wants to buy it, we'll have a look at the airport itself, we'll have a look at that if somebody does step forward. But I'd appreciate if we just leave everything as status quo, giving our neighbors a little more time to come forward, and see if they would be interested in what I call the fairest deal that's ever been put on the face of the earth. And if not, then we should divest ourselves of it. That's all there is to it, because it is not North Huron, it is Morris Turnberry land, so we need to divest ourselves from it within a year, and we can have that discussion another day. So if that can help things kind of come to an end.
So, one thing I want to follow up here as we talk about divestiture. There's rules in place that require us to provide in order to take a proposal from anybody that's willing to buy that property, we have to declare it surplus. So we can't be doing two things at the same time. We can't be keeping it open and looking for proposals on the other hand. We either have to decide that it's surplus or we just have to decide that it's not. So let's come to a fruition of that arrangement, because we can't do one and think we're going to do one and it's fine that it's just sitting there not being used, but also warranting and making it well known in the public eye, oh, we're willing to take offers, because that's not transparency. We have to declare it being surplus first and then put the offer out there to be welcome for proposals. So I want to make sure council's aware of that, because I think we have to understand the transparency part of this operation is the most important part about when you sell a municipal asset. So that asset and I want to just say, I agree with every comment that has been made here today. The one thing that I would argue is we have to come under the understanding of that this has been a discussion for 4 years. We keep punting it down the road. We've punted it down the road 3 times. The council before it punted it down the road 5 times. The council before it probably punted it down to the previous council. One of the concerns I have is we're trying to make a decision dependent on some type of arrangement with another municipality. We're trying to make decisions that are ultimately, in my mind, should not impact what that decision is. If we're going to divest of the airport, whether there's commercial property out there or industrial land or whatever the heck it is, we still run it. We still run that airport, and that's going to cost us money. So unless you're going to tie development out there, to pay for that airport, you're not benefiting anything. Like, nothing's being benefited in North Huron, because the money is still going out the door to pay for the runway. And I will tell you right now, if we have to do that runway, it's $2 million at least. And where is that money coming from? My personal opinion is that we've punted this down the road long enough. I have had more meetings about, what an arrangement we can make and whatever. I'm not seeing any fruition in those arrangements or any movement. We need to make decisions on what we can do based on the information we have today. And my opinion is we need to divest ourselves of that airport. For the betterment of our municipality, to have 35 people use it in a COVID year, even in a non-COVID year, I don't think it hit 100. So for somebody to come here and tell me it's spurring economic development, I don't see it. There's businesses out there, and I completely agree. Apex is a great business for this municipality, so I'm not disowning the fact that they run a business out of an airport. But they could then have the airport, buy it. You can have your cake and eat it too. You can sell all the fuel you want. I don't care. But we as a municipality, no different than the airport, or no different than the trailer park, we are not an airport community. We do not have an airport. We don't run it correctly. And it's not staff's problem. It is not an essential service to this municipality. So that's my comments to where we are. So do we have anybody else, Reeve Bailey? And then I'll go to Councillor Faulkner.
So do we have a motion on the table? Sorry, I was out of the room.
So there's no motion on the table, and the reason why there is no motion on the table is because I made an executive decision. There was going to be lots of discussion, and in no sense of having a motion and then having another motion. So
Absolutely.
basically, I'm waiting for a motion from somebody, but I'll go to Councillor Faulkner first, and then we'll talk
I
about.
was going to put a motion on the floor.
Councillor Faulkner is asked to speak.
Yeah, I was going to put a motion on, propose a motion on the floor to direct staff to proceed with designating the airport as surplus, the airport proper as surplus.
So the airport property is surplus.
For the purposes of receiving offers, I'm assuming, right, you'd want
To
to capture.
divest ourselves of that. of
Yeah,
that
you'd wanna
piece of
capture
property.
that.
We all understand that
So
it's
ju-
77 acres.
So well, after the clerk gets it, I'll make sure he reads it again so that we're all clear about what the motion is. And then I'll ask for a seconder.
And the thought process is just that might promote.
Interesting.
Yeah, and might promote the ideas of that property being used for industrial it might make that, rather than making it all together, it could be done in steps. I believe, what Deputy Reed said, what you just said, I agree with, so.
So I'll let the clerk read the motion as he's listened to what you've said, Councillor Faulkner, and you can acknowledge whether it's correct or not.
Yep, and I guess just before I read the motion, the one point that I would make too is, I get the sense that council wants to see what the level of interest would be on someone buying the airport, and in order to get a true and accurate picture, as Deputy Reeve Sipes said, you have to go through that process of declaring it surplus. In my past experience, as a lot of time, members of the public don't necessarily know that they can approach the township and say, hey, I'd like to buy this, right? So if you're really looking to get a sense of what the level of interest out there is, you definitely want to declare the property surplus and advertise it kind of as a whole to see what the interest is.
Just one other point. I want to make sure I'm clear. Divesting it as surplus does not constitute sale for sure. Just so the people in the public who are watching today and the media who may be watching the front page news, it does not mean North Huron is selling it. It means North Huron is reviewing whether it's available to sell. That's the conversation that needs to be discussed. Clerk?
So the motion on the floor is that the Council of the Township of North Huron hereby receive the report of the Director of Public Works and Facilities dated October 19th, 2020 regarding the Richard W. Levan Airport for information, and further that Council consider this report in conjunction with the Service Delivery Review Report prepared by KPMG dated September 2020, and further that Council directs staff to proceed with the process of declaring the airport portion of the Richard W. Levan Airport lands as surplus for the purpose of divesting of the asset.
That was your motion.
Okay.
I agree with
Okay.
that.
Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Okay, Councillor McBurney seconds it. Just for a point of clarity, do we need to include, because if anything offered, then there's still gonna be a purchase and sale agreement that'll have to be drawn up, which will come to council as well, correct? If we get to that point.
Right.
I'm just talking about because of the helipad discussion.
So just in response, Deputy Reeve, so as far as essentially as you've indicated in terms of the property, this motion, if approved, would declare the property surplus, and that basically means that council is open to receiving offers on that 77 acres. But in terms of actually selling it, doesn't mean that it's for sale, it means that council is accepting offers on it. Council has to authorize a purchase and sale agreement for the actual sale. And as part of the purchase and sale agreement, things like the helipad, for example, can be addressed and considered should council decide to accept an offer that they have received. The other thing I'll maybe just add is in terms of when you're doing a purchase and sale, in terms of appraisal of that property, and I'll have to go back. I don't know if the clerk knows, but I know that we did have some properties appraised. I can't remember where that one in particular was appraised, but if not, we'll have to undertake to have that appraised, so that should you receive an offer, then you'll know whether or not that offer is representative of the value of the property. The appraised value, though, is not, that's something for council only, in terms of, that appraisal is not public information. It's, so when you receive an offer, you at least have some idea as to what the value of that property is. in terms of deciding should you wish to accept or not accept an offer that has been presented, so.
Okay, so I've got Councillor Faulkner moving, I've got Councillor McBurney seconding it, I have got Councillor Palmer that has a question or a comment.
Yeah, I'm sort of a stickler for words, and through you, Deputy Reeve. Clerk, you said airport lands. I'm not sure if that clarifies it well enough. It could be airport proper. Because we need to specify, make sure it's the 77 acres, and nobody thinks that the agricultural land is part of the surplus part, that's all.
Yeah, and so if the mover and the seconder are okay with that amendment, we can definitely make that amendment too. But the other thing that I'm thinking of too is if the property, I don't remember whether the property is merged as one. So in order to declare it surplus, you might need to sever the two portions of the property first, because then when you declare it surplus, you'd be advertising the legal description for basically the airport proper and not the agricultural land.
Sorry.
Right.
No, yeah, through, so, yes, in terms of, the clerk is correct. You have authority under the Planning Act that you can basically, you have a survey done by an Ontario land surveyor, and then the municipality doesn't have to go through the severance process. You survey land, you register it on title, it's automatically two properties. You don't go through the severance process.
Reeve Bailey?
So just, I keep hearing the term 77 acres, so right now, on that 77 acres, would any of those acreages be farmed right now, which would mean they're not needed for the airport? Maybe it's only 60 acres. How did we determine the 77?
74.81.
Oh, 74.81. The 74.81, is there, are they growing anything on it, or is it strictly?
No, through your worship, just in terms of, so when you do the survey, the instruction to the surveyor would be to ensure that the lands that are severed to become, going back to Councillor Palmer's comment, airport property, that when that line is put in, that no agricultural land is included or minimal included as part of that parcel. That, so whether it's 74 or 77, but you're in that, ballpark-ish, you're in that area. The exact acreage will be determined when the survey is completed.
One final question. Will there be entranceway on the rest of the property if we sever that off? Because I do believe there's agriculture land in front of the airport itself, and there's one laneway. So would we be able to provide other entranceways into the remaining portions if we do that?
Yeah, so through you, Deputy Reeve, that is something that we'll have to look at, ensuring that the remaining parcel does have access.
Thank you.
So, sorry,
So,
Councillor
This
Huffer?
question a bit earlier, also remember back years ago, there's a helipad out at Mr. Hoy's. So if that could be utilized again, to me it's closer to the hospital, it might free up, some of the things might have to be said about the helipad at the airport. It's just a thought, they used to land there for years, and it's just leaving that with you.
It's a possibility. I think ultimately, at the end of the day, I think it was used, and then it's being used for something else. And if I recall the discussion that has been had, that there has been no interest in relinquishing that land for any other purpose
Okay,
that I
thank you.
recall. But again, there's nothing hurting in
Thank you.
asking. Okay, so I have.
So right now you have on the floor, Councillor Palmer has asked for an amendment to
Yep.
the original motion.
And I was just gonna go and ask Mr. Faulkner if he was okay with that amendment.
Yes.
Second is okay? Okay, okay. I would prefer the clerk to read that again, please. Thank you.
So the motion on the floor is that the Council of the Township of North Huron hereby receive the report of the Director of Public Works and Facilities dated October 19th, 2020 regarding the Richard W. Levan Airport for information. And further, that council consider this report in conjunction with the service delivery review report prepared by KPMG dated September 2020. And further, that council directs staff to proceed with the process of declaring the airport proper portion of the Richard W. Levan Airport lands as surplus for the purpose of divesting of the asset.
Okay, I have a mover and I have a seconder. All those in favor of that motion? Carried. Okay.
Wayne, can I use that little wipe there behind me for a second? I'm just gonna get a little wipe before I change spots here. This? Yeah.
Let's just have a 5-minute break and give Donna time to set up and everybody ready to go.
Ball's gonna burst. Ball's gonna burst.
I'll just leave that running.
Okay, so so everybody knows that the video is running. Like that. Okay. Did you get a chance to speak to the senior? It's okay. Yeah, you said that you're about to send it, I'll bring it up.
I think we'll just do it. I think you took
I have some of the office.
you know, return
I
something.
know,
Because
too, right? And then
again,
left drawer,
just when I
Yeah,
initially
me
got
too.
it, all these things went through my head.
left drawer, yeah.
And I'm sure you guys have thoughts as well. So I wondered just as far as you suggested, or, you know, let's have a meet next week. Let's meet next week. Let's pool all the thoughts
I'll slip
because,
through the rest.
I mean, there's pros and cons to the different options around it. And one of the options, like I said, was, you know, if we were to decide to apply and just apply it. And, you know, they've been giving us $100,000. And in return for that, they've been getting all these discounts. And let's say they give us $25,000. So they give us $25,000 and in return they could attach a string that says, but all of our residents are gonna get the discount. And it's like you're accepting less than that. Like, so I don't know if the answer is yes. And the other thing is I feel like we're negotiating that schedule outside of the hospital.
Yeah. We're heading down that path. We either make a stand or we get talked about. That's our choice.
It's clear that more chamber teachers have been user paid. You know?
Yeah.
We've
But
had,
the residents have been
Honestly, doing that analysis,
considering everything right.
we have to revisit the stuff. So the fire department must get notification through our council. They can't use the cemetery, they can go to home cemetery, get a personal. I mean, I know,
Frank's trying to get in.
Yeah, no problem.
And I'm not supplying your requirements, son, get the hell out.
Absolutely.
Make your own home, your own life, your own insurance, that's called getting a job. But you're not living in my basement under those circumstances.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so again, so that what I sent you was just kind of, my initial, that was one of the thoughts. I mean, there were a lot that went, but just as far as, I don't mind, you know, I know I'm talking to staff on it, just, again, because we're in the budget process. I'm asking questions, so I want to let them know. But the response that
we were
that
talking
got
about
from staff was,
easing
you
up
know,
on
start looking at it, and I'm like, whoa, like,
Kim was contacting
bring
public
things
health
forward.
to see
My,
if we could
my
implement
thought
more
is,
passing
you guys,
screening.
and,
What
my thought is to bring
I
this
mean,
to
we
the
were,
council.
we're like, well, maybe we'll wait till January to do it because we're gonna
Because
start
again, there's pros
a
and
second,
cons.
thing of, programs.
And I think there's pros and
Yeah.
cons as
And I'm
well
like,
for
okay,
this.
that sounds good, you know, everything's good. And I got an email last night.
And I asked the question.
And I guess there was a bit of a
I didn't know
kerfuffle there last night.
but a month has gone by and.
We had problems
Gotta get it
with
I see that.
the parents trying to come in.
And then it was gonna slip.
It's one parent per child. And we had parents, a parent with another child.
Well,
that's his.
That's why they've been so sensitive.
But what is that we're doing with everybody?
And they were trying to
Well,
find.
that's why I want to
Are
reach
we
out.
being treated differently?
I want to reach out to the seals, that's why I want to.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, no, I will do that for sure, but, I just didn't, but that's the sort of thing I think we need to do a little bit and looking into it, and then, we'll have that discussion, and then figure out, at least if nothing else, this is my thought, is put that course before that, and we have all the information, all that research, and then you three will then, could then, make
To isolate.
advocate for position, if you want to call that, saying that there is apply or we don't apply, or we apply for this amount, apply for this amount. I don't know the answer, but I think the three of you should be on the same, but I think the council goes to be part, like, it's entrusted to three of you, this is part of the things, but it's not. Well, yeah, it's kind of one, it's kind of,
I really,
Which is probably more universal, like everybody.
they let it last. For this particular reason, we are going to, Trevor kept trying to tell us, so I wanted it, and I forget where I read it, they called the police for doing it.
They're really
They
good.
let that last, that, they let that last
We've made an exception to that.
They're going to do that.
So what are we doing now?
Now, chances are we saving this
And
5.2, right? It only makes sense.
Seven, whatever it is, off the table now, then you're gonna have to.
And we do stick to
I know, you don't have any physical challenges. Take your
Keep all the
extra
way on
steps
this.
and walk around the outside.
You don't want this and this and this, we cannot say
It was like 3.5 years total, so wherever that puts us from the time. So we'll go to about 12:30.
Okay.
Trevor,
Okay.
It would go through.
I'm ready to be right there.
As soon as they get back, we'll go. Sorry, Donna.
Through the end.
It was hard to believe, but I got into a conversation, didn't stop talking. I know you won't believe that.
All things take my headache pills.
Okay. Yeah. Let it breathe. Or you're a bandito if you don't.
Let's see who's yelling at me today.
Carson, next time I just have to do my one time. You kick me in the behind.
I'm just so glad we did the website. Yeah, so you have quorum already, so you can start.
So we have quorum now, so we're going to move forward. We're gonna start with 5.2, 2020 year-to-date budget summary report. Donna?
Thank you, Reed Bailey. So, this morning then, also I just wanted to mention from our clerk that, we're going to continue with this portion till 12:30, and then we're gonna break for lunch at that point. We can decide how close we are at that point, whether we just, grab our lunch and eat through lunch, or whether, we stop for a few minutes. So we can sort of reevaluate at that time. So what we're going to talk about next is we're going to look at this budget summary for just a couple of minutes, and then we're going to spend a few minutes on our, the next item is the project status report, so that will be the next thing that we're going to look at. Both of these spreadsheets were in your agenda package. And then the department heads, which wasn't in your agenda package, the department heads will each go through a bit of an update about their department. And we'll talk about the numbers on this budget summary in a little bit more detail. So, and then we'll have a PowerPoint that will go up after this. So we're gonna get started. Feel free to ask any questions as we move along. So as I said, in the budget summary, the main thing here is that we're looking for a target of 75% because September 30th is 3/4 of the way through the year. As you know, because we are a service industry, we don't really operate on 1/12 or 9/12 of a business like others do, but we have to use something as a benchmark. So as we take a look at this summary here, the main thing, as I said, that we were looking at 75%, but we know that there's variances there. So under the general government section, we look like we're way over on that particular section, which we'll talk about in a bit more detail. But the main thing that's throwing this area off is that our clerk applied for a $100,000 grant, which was never intended for 2020, and that is the ramp that is going out front. And so we have actually received that money, and it's in our bank and in our GL, which we will then have to transfer at the end of the year. So that's basically the biggest thing throwing off the general government section. Under protection to persons and property, it's pretty well right on. There is some variances on the individual lines, and we'll talk about those a little bit more as we move forward. Transportation is under, and that's to be expected with some of the operations, and again, Jamie is going to go into that in more detail. Environmental, we are also underspent in a lot of areas under environmental, water and sewer. Waste department is not so much under, and as I said, Jamie's gonna talk about that a little bit more. Cemeteries, again, it looks like we were over. We were looking for a deficit there of the $34,000 is what our deficit was going to be. There's some numbers cut off on this that are not coming through. I don't know if you can see them up there. I'm gonna use my other pair of glasses. Yeah, okay, so the numbers are up there. They just didn't come through on the PDF as well. So on total cemeteries, we were looking for a total deficit for this year at $34,000, and we're actually at $39,000, so about $5,000 difference there. And so by year end, though, we have a couple of transfers to make, so that will we'll probably see that amount, that deficit rise. Valerie's going to talk to us about the children's programs as we move there, and that's one of the areas of the most heavily affected by COVID, as you can imagine. So we were looking for a $43,000 surplus, but when I ran this report, we were at a $50,000 deficit. So as I said, Valerie's going to expand on that a little bit. And then I've added into mine early on, which Valerie hasn't, so there's a little bit difference in the numbers she's going to talk to you about. Next, in parks and recreation and culture, parks, we've seen parks is significantly under, and then rec programs is over, so you can tell. So just to expand on that, we were expecting parks to cost the taxpayers $226,000, but at this point, because we didn't hire the students and such, it's only cost us to date $96,000. And on the reverse side, though, programs was only going to cost us $44,000, but at this point it's $112,000, and so there's various differences there. Overall, it evens out somewhat, but again, we're going to have to address that. Under planning and economic development is quite a bit under. There's a lot of projects left to do there, and Dwayne will speak to those when we get to those. And capital, also we are quite underspent on capital, and we're going to talk about that on the next slide. The surprising part of things, though, is overall we're at about 77% of where we should be. So when you take our total revenue less our total expenses, the difference in a business world would be the deficit, but for us, we can't run a deficit, so that exact amount is what we raise on taxation to bring it to zero. So we are at about 77% right now where we should be, in that world, but I know in the next few months, a lot of things are going to change with our revenue and expenses as we prepare for year end, so it's definitely going to be, varied by then. So we're gonna flip over now, if you would flip over to the, one called the project status report. And so we're gonna, look at this in some detail then. So on this status report, the bottom line is going to be is that we're going to end up transferring significant amounts of money to the 2021 budget because a lot of these projects are not done. And so they're started and underway, and we'll get them as far as we can by year end, but you're going to see a lot of them show up for next year. So I just kind of wanted to bring that to your attention. So as we start at the top of the list, Carling Terrace Road reconstruction, the job is completed. We have the top lift to do in 2021, so you'll see a portion of that in the 2021 budget. For Moncrief Road surface treatment, that project is completed. We haven't had all the invoices come in for that, but they definitely will come in. The building condition assessment, Jamie just presented a report to you at the council meeting about this. We haven't received their invoices yet, but that will come. The next step on that is to take, we talked a little bit about it, but it's quite a big, we simplified it, but it is quite a big job to next take that information and then mesh it into our asset management software. So as one of the big things we have to do is talk about the number of components and how we're going to manage each of those pieces of the building so that we can move forward and budget for those on an individual basis. So there's still a lot of work left to be done before year end to get it into our software piece, but our consultant piece is finished, and I would expect now that Jamie has presented the report that the invoice for him will come along. The Wingham sidewalks connecting link, Josephine and Amberley, that has been deferred to 2021, and we're waiting on a traffic study. I'm not sure if you have the information on that through the county. Is that correct, Jamie?
That's correct.
Yes, so the county is going to conduct a traffic study there, so we aren't going to do anything with this project until we see the results of that study. For the Blythe Parking Initiative, that had 3 pieces, sidewalk paving and street lights. This is not to do with the county installing the traffic light there. This was a piece of our project, and we have the sidewalk portion completed. So my understanding is the rest of the project will come forward next year as well. For the house and dam site security, we've deferred that project. We were waiting for the results of the engineering RFP, and I'm thinking Jamie will be bringing a report on that at some time to council in the near future. So we didn't go ahead and do all the fencing. This money was to fence the dam off and to be able to prohibit people from getting in underneath. And so as I said, we're waiting now until we get the RFP back to see where we go from there. As for Public Works, we had a 4-wheel drive 1-ton truck with box, and we have purchased that. It's completed and we're waiting on delivery unless it's arrived, Jamie, since I typed this up. No, okay. Also, we had a pickup truck, and we were also waiting on delivery of it, and we are still waiting for that to arrive, and then therefore those expenses will be paid once we get the invoices in. Jamie brought you a report forward, and council made a motion to defer the 3rd truck to the 2021 year because there wasn't enough money in the 2020 budget to purchase the 3 as we had hoped. On to the Blythe Community Center leaks. Those, that is in progress, and we expect that to be completed in October. Town Hall Council Chambers, we were going to replace the carpet in this room in particular. We've deferred that because you're having your discussions about, with COVID, relocating the council chambers, and as you know, next meeting we're going to be upstairs. So at this moment, we're not going to do anything with this floor until we know what permanent arrangements we're going to make, if any. Also in this year's budget, we have deferred, we were going to do some work on the exterior of this building. I don't know if you've noticed, but the paint on the outside is getting in pretty rough shape, as is the windowsills. If you ever look at a lot of the windowsills, they're pretty much deteriorated. So it was a little bit more work than just painting, but we've deferred that till 2021 at this point. We've talked to council a few times about the basement renovation, and so it's underway. They're not hammering today, but they are working away down there every day, and I expect that will be done in October as well. So that's going to allow us to utilize that space down there in a much better method for record storage, and as you know, the server has been all moved down there and such like that, and now with the heat and everything, the way it's been spray foamed and such, that we're going to actually be able to put cabinets of records down there and feel that they're not going to deteriorate. So that's all going to be good when this is finished. The town hall accessibility ramp, it wasn't part of the 2020 budget. That was something that the clerk brought you a report when this grant application came out. And so he applied for it and was successful, and they sent the money right away. So we have to, the money is in our bank, and so at year end we'll have to transfer that money to reserves until the ramp can be completed. Also, the clerk hopes to bring you a report on this project before year end, and then we can talk about transferring this money at that time. The town hall theater renovations, our volunteer group has over the last few years been actively raising money and making renovations upstairs, and so as they raise their money, then they go ahead and do something with equal value. The projects that they were going to do this year have been deferred because of COVID. The theater is closed. For the fire hall and public works building down in Blythe, so the fire hall portion is complete. The salt and sand shed is still supposed to start yet in October, so I'm not sure if it will get completed fully in 2020. Jamie's saying no, so it will get started but not likely completed, so that will be one that we'll have to transfer some of the money forward. Down at the Westcast Center, they've taken a good step forward to address the humidity and condensation problem, and so that first step of the project has been completed, so that's good. The Wingham Standpipe project, we had $75,000 in the budget to do some engineering. We've deferred that till 2021 to wait to hear if we're going to get some funding on that project. So we still have fingers crossed that we may hear something this year or we may not. So in Wingham, the well system, we were going to update the SCADA system, and before Sean left, he had brought a report to you saying there was no way we were going to get to that this year. And so the money was reallocated. As you know, we had some pretty extensive well repairs that we weren't expecting, and so council had passed a motion to flip that money from the SCADA system to the repairs, I guess you call them. And so then you're going to see that SCADA system come back in the 2021 budget. Down at Blythe, the dechlorination project, and this is something that's required due to legislation. Jamie brought you a report to have the engineer approved, so that only if any of the dollars are spent this year, it'll be a very small amount on engineering. So that whole project has to come forward again in 2021. Also, the other night, Jamie talked to you about the repair of the public works shop roof, and so the tender has been awarded for that, and we expect the work to be completed in 2021. So North Street reconstruction, this was the top lift there, and so we've deferred that to 2021 in conjunction with some other work being done in the Rutledge subdivision. So it will need the top coat at some point, but we're waiting to see some of the other work being done there before we have to do it twice. Stone Orchard, which is our cemetery records, We're waiting on that due to COVID and due to the staff reallocation in our front office. That's gonna move forward to 2021 to be completed. Down at the complex, we had boiler number 5 and boiler number 6 to be replaced this year, and both those projects have been completed. Also down at the fitness center, we were going to do a cycle replacement. It's part of our ongoing replacement, that the staff down there replace their equipment on a regular basis, and so again, with the COVID, that has been deferred to 2021. The complex condenser project has also been completed. The rec software that Vicky was speaking to you about is well underway and will be started, I shouldn't say well underway, I should say underway. And Vicky is hoping and her team that that will be completed by December of this year. Also, the municipal website, that we've all been working on that all year long, and hoping that that is soon completed. And so anyway, we expect that to be up and running by December. So that has been a very intensive project, and we hope that the finished product is something that will certainly help our ratepayers, help council, help staff to be able to provide direction to our ratepayers. The one snag, as your clerk told you the other night, was we hadn't intended to put on, say for example, my own example, 5 years of our budgets, 5 years of tax rates. But because of the accessibility legislation, our documents are not all in accessible format, I guess you call them. And so then we have to go put them through remediation, which costs money. And so then now our website at this point is not going to have the years of data on it that we had hoped that we were going to be able to put on it. Now, to address that, the clerk is in conjunction with other municipalities. First off, you passed a motion the other night to request a 1-year extension, which would be great. Secondly, we have got pricing on training on how to have our staff make all our future documents accessible in the future. So whatever we need for software and that, we can do that in-house. And then hopefully also we can go back and remediate some of our own documents. But it's all timing, so what we need to have on there for right now has to be accessible, and we'll have to spend some money on getting the legislated documents remediated to post. But we're, as I said, we're not gonna have all the documents on there that we hoped we would. Moving on to the Blythe Howlett CAS procurement, that is in progress. We do hope that that is completed in 2020. Hutton Heights Engineering and Design is underway. I know that the CAO is following up. We haven't received a lot of the invoicing at this point, so he's following up on that sort of thing. Your service delivery review, you had the presentation today. It's going to, as we said, it's going to be a living document. The actual work by the consultant has been completed, but it now leads to a lot of other work through for council and staff for ever, I guess, to work with. And so then we'll be paying, their invoices will be coming in now that the presentation has been made. For the Armories building next door, we had in the budget it was about $26,500 to remove the electrical from the side of the building. I think if anybody remembers that years ago, they wired both this building and the wiring for this building and the police station was mounted on the police station building. So now we have to, if it goes ahead with tearing the building down, then we need to take that electrical off. And we're waiting on removing the heritage designation. So that's our hold up there. This morning we spent a bit of time talking about the need for human resources. This isn't a capital project, but as the CAO alluded to, we did include $55,000 in this year's budget as we were hoping to do a partnership or cost sharing of some sort to be able to address this. The CAO has made some alternative arrangements which will be a small amount of money spent this year, but he will continue to investigate however we're going to address that need for sure. we were looking, and it's underway, the municipal site security, so that is a project where we were going to be installing some cameras and security cameras on various of the township buildings. In no way is that going to be enough to do them all. We've picked a few, and so we're working with the security people to have those installed, and I'm hoping that is still done this year. I think Stu was looking into that for us, Jamie, so.
Through you, your worship, so the operations supervisor and myself met with Continuit yesterday, and we finalized a plan of what that would look like to move forward, so that will definitely be completed by the end of this year.
Perfect, thank you for the update, Carson. Okay, and also then, as part of a move forward and to protect our records and have better searchability and all of that, Council had approved, as part of the modernization funding, the award of a scanning contract. So we actually have a person hired, and she is doing a great job, but the position was supposed to start way back in the spring for a 10-month contract, but then with COVID, we didn't get to start till late September. So that money, although it's underway, we have to go 10 months from September. So I think, Carson, I'm not sure if you wanna expand on how pleased you are with how that's going.
Yeah, no, I would just say that we're definitely thrilled to have her now, and like we've been able to start making use of the Laserfish system. So I guess the example I would give, so when Dwayne mentioned all the background on the Blythe State Park, we were able to obtain that information because Olivia, our contract physician, has all the minutes from 2001 to up until now in Laserfish already. So we're definitely happy to have her, and it's making a huge difference in us finding documents for sure.
Yes. Okay, so that is an update on our project status, and as I said, it's not that any of these projects don't need done, it's just that we are definitely behind on some things due to being closed down for quite a few months. So through staff efforts, we're going to push through and get as much of this done yet in 2020 that we can. But you'll see reports coming forward in part of the 2021 budget, things that have to be pushed over into next year's budget. Okay, so is there any questions on the project status before we move on to the PowerPoint? Okay, thank you. So now, Kirk, you have to go at 12.
10 opening, yeah.
Okay, so I'll maybe just do a couple of things, and then we'll jump ahead to your slides if that's okay. Okay, so here we are at late in October in 2020. It's been quite a year, and so this is an opportunity. We had this meeting last year, and it's a little bit different phase, I guess, if you will, this year because of all the things that have happened this year. So as I said, we are looking at a target guideline of 75%, but again, with the COVID effects and seasonal activities and such, that 75% is just a guideline that as staff we follow, and then we look for our seasonal changes. Today's meeting helps us look ahead to year end. And as you know, with part of the phase 2 funding application, we're required to do all that forecasting. So all of it is good timing in that we're working on budgets, we're looking at where we are at this point in the year, and we're looking ahead to year end. So the timing and the information is going to be all good. So we've had a discussion on projects to be moved forward to 2021, so we'll keep you apprised of those changes as we work our way through the year, and also we want to be able to mitigate any overage items that we run into. So just a few budget details. Our budget was passed on April the 6th by virtual meeting, which was a first for us. Our total expenditures, $17,769,000. Our operating budget, just over $14 million. Our capital budget, $3.6 million. Our total revenue, $11 million. We transfer money out of our tax stabilization reserve to lessen the impact, and so therefore the difference is what we raise on taxation, which was $6,146,000. So year to date, a couple of things that we always keep an eye on are our wages and benefits. So this year's total budget for wages and benefits was $5,131,000, and right now we're just over $3 million, which is about just less than 60% of that, which reflects that those staff were off. For hydro, again, our hydro, we experienced some lag in the bills, and we have had some decrease in hydro, especially street lighting, and Jamie and I'll touch on that a bit with you in that part of the presentation. So we're only at about less than 50% on the hydro. And then I talked to you a little bit about where we were with the 77% overall on the budget summary, but just when you look at it individually, both our operating expenses and revenues are down quite a bit, or we're quite a bit down on capital at this point as well. So as we move through the end of the year, the capital, as I said, we're gonna end up having to move a lot forward. So I'm just gonna pop forward here to Kirk's slide here. And so Kirk has 2 slides, and then he has to step out. So he is going to talk to you about the building department and the property standards department.
Okay. It's still morning. Good morning, council. Real quickly, 2 slides. First slide, building department. So we projected and budgeted $120,000 for revenue this year. We're currently sitting at $107,513. That being roughly 90% projected. Expenses budgeted at $145,514, and our actual is $93,456. So I'd say the building department is looking pretty good this year for North Huron. Underspent travel, training, workshops. Usually we head down to Mississauga or Toronto and do some training at our Ontario Building Officials Association office, and we try to schedule 3 technical sessions. Certainly we haven't done those, and quite honestly we haven't had time to do those online as well. So underspent certainly there, and a minor underspent would be office supplies of $1,500. Okay, property standards, budgeted revenue of $2,400. Actual is nothing. Right now, we have some invoicing that we are sending out. So when we do get a complaint about a property and it's validated and we send an order out, there's an $80 fine. Alright, so invoicing will be taking place for properties that Bruce Broadwood is working on right now. There are other fees associated with that, but those start once we get into court or attending court. So we budgeted for expenditures of $17,584, and currently right now we're sitting at $5,101. Again, underspent on travel training. We haven't been able to attend any courses, and legal is underspent as well. So we budgeted $7,500 for legal, and we're waiting on a court date, so I'm sure that will get spent at some time, but not this year, most likely.
Okay, so thank you, Kirk. Does council have any questions for Kirk before he has to step out on the building related matters?
So Kirk, on the money that, for the legal, you're going to bring that money forward plus ask for, so you're gonna kinda have a jump next year in your budget, right? Because you're gonna have what you need for it you didn't spend this year, which we know because the courts were closed. And then you're going to have to budget higher for next year because of the closure. Am I right on that?
That most likely will be the case,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah, thank you.
The only other question I had was, the property that is, there's a property issue that we dealt with a fence in Wingham on, that house is now for sale. Does that affect because everything was signed on title, correct? Like everything that we agreed to is gonna go with the sale, correct? Like the property, the issue there is that the house that is being sold.
Yeah,
So,
I know exactly where you're at.
so the question I'm asking is that we're not gonna get, is something gonna be coming to this council after the sale about the issue again, is my question.
No, we're trying to address that prior to the sale.
Perfect, thank you very much.
I'm in discussions with that currently.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Okay.
Thank you,
Okay,
Kirk.
then, thank you. Okay, so we're gonna go back to the start here then. Okay, so general government, so in our general government section, that's where we have things like our licenses and permits, marriage licenses, and that's where our grant money, our OMPF grant comes in there, and so there's no problem with the grant coming in. There's nothing really out of the ordinary in the general government section. I expect it to come in basically on target. Later on in the year, as you know, we make 2 payments to the physician recruitment initiative, so we'll have the second payment to pay by the end of the year. And then we have a number of loan payments that we pay the final payment later on in the year as well. So nothing out of the ordinary on general government. Okay? So if we move through to council then, normally for council, we are able to recover a little bit of the Reeves, if the Reeve attends some of the meetings, the county shares some of our costs, but again, with all the conferences canceled, that didn't happen this year. And then the same you'll hear the same theme through the whole presentation, and again, this will factor into our year-end forecast. We're way underspent in travel and training across the whole municipality, every department. Nobody could go anywhere. We are taking advantage as much virtual training as what we can, and in some cases that's been offered free. So we're taking advantage of what we can there. But we are still going to, before year end, participate in some training that has switched to online, and there is cost for that, but not as much as having to go and have the accommodations as well. So we'll have to review that at year end and see where we're at. And not only for all the other departments, but for council themselves. So that's where you're underspent mainly. And then also, council always has a little bit of council contingency, $2,000, and we haven't had to spend that as yet this year either. So you may wish to move that forward to reserves, or you may not, depending on how our year end ends up. Any questions on that, council?
Reeve, Donna, I'm assuming based on the atmosphere that we're in, 2021 for travel, training, and workshops will probably fall in the same line that we're in right now. Is that what the expectation council should be seeing is in their budgets or for that relating to?
It's hard to say at this very minute whether things will open up again. Certainly the online is really ramping up. And so a lot of the conferences and stuff, as you know, could have been attended virtually this year. So then that cuts out the accommodation part. So as a straight answer, I don't know how much it's going to be reduced, but I would expect everyone to reduce the travel training to be reduced somewhat next year, because I don't think we're going to be able to go January, February. There's conventions in, first part of the year. I don't think you're going to be able to go there by then.
Well, I can tell you right now, Roma's out virtual. Like Roma's automatically virtual. They've already, and I would suggest probably everything's going to be virtual at least till the fall. If anything, I don't see them opening it. That's based on what the Ontario government is projecting and what they've suggested. I don't see us having anything. And ultimately, I guess my position is that, in travel training and workshops, I think training and workshops are important. I really do.
Sure.
I think we need to leverage. All these trainings and what they've had to change their philosophy on how they offer it. They've had to change the philosophy in offering these things electronic. I think we need to take, because of the remote location and where we are at, I think we need to start leveraging those types of things. I say honestly, workshops and stuff are great for networking and stuff, but I think if we can leverage some virtual with some in person, I think we would be more apt to get more bang for our buck as it relates to that, and I just a thought on my pen.
Sure.
Just wanna throw something out there because of the unfortunate times we find ourselves in. With the money we're not spending on workshops and that, and with the council money that we're not spending at the end of the year, I'm sure it's only gonna add up to a few $1,000s, but I'd like council to give consideration to give that to the food banks in North Huron. Just some thought to throw out there as we move forward. Go ahead.
Yep, so the one piece that Don and I have already talked about, so in council's remuneration policy, basically it says $2,500 for each counselor for training for the year, and then another $2,500 for group training. The only group training we did this year was with John Mascaron on his role as the integrity commissioner. So Don and I have already discussed this, but this might be an area for council to look into. Look at what you currently have for funds for travel and training, and potentially just carry over those funds, and because every year we're required to budget an extra $2,500, but this year it's very underspent, so that might be an area for council to look at based on where it's at for the end of the year. I believe the only conferences that council have attended for the year was a couple of our councilors went to Roma in January before, and maybe Ontario Good Roads too. So there's definitely areas there.
So you're suggesting to carry them over to the following, take that money, put it in the following year rather than give it to the food bank?
Well, no, it's ultimately up for council's consideration, but basically that is an option for you. You wouldn't necessarily need to budget another $2,500 for each of your travel and training plus the group funds if there's already funds available, right? You can just use that, carry it over and use it as the next year instead.
Yeah. Something to give consideration to.
And then also some of the counselors did it virtually attending, correct?
Yeah, right.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move on to the next one. So administration. So under administration then, we have seen quite a few changes there. And that's one of the things about comparing, with comparable municipalities, there's different things get included in different areas in the budget. So in administration this year, we did have quite a few studies. So we had the extra cost of our HR policy being updated, as the CAO alluded to, and I think we're expecting that project to be completed by year end, so we'll see all the invoicing come in from that. Under the clerk's department, we had money put in for a community safety and well-being plan, and that's not going to be completed next year. But he does need that money transferred forward, and then we have to add to it next year for the next pieces of that plan that have to be completed next year, so we'll have to move that forward. Under the service delivery review, as I said, the invoices will come in for that now, since that has been completed from the consultant's point of view. For town hall accessibility and document remediation, so we've paid for the front part of the renovations that we had to do there, and that was split between the Main Street grant that we had and this funding. And then we have to pay for the document remediation, but as I said earlier, the clerk will be bringing you forward for the balance of this money to go forward into reserves, because he's thinking that the $100,000 isn't gonna cover the ramp that we need for next year. So we wanna be able to add this money to it, and then plus work on our documents. Did you wanna add something?
Yeah, I would just, so the plan is basically, myself and the Director of Public Works are working back and forth to bring a joint report to council on kind of what that would look like as a plan for the mobility ramp and the 3 sets of accessible doors. The one thing we ran into is this building is a heritage designated building, so we received the most money that we were going to get from the federal government anyways, but in order for us to make those doors accessible, they have to basically, for this building, the front facade, and then both the north and south sides of this building, those facades are all deemed heritage designated. So if you were, when you're going to make those doors accessible, basically without removing or amending the heritage designation, you have to maintain the same kind of architectural features of that, which is kind of those curved archways, all that kind of thing. And so the Director of Public Works and I are working back and forth with engineering to bring something forward to council, but we're hopeful that we bring a plan forward by the end of this year, and then any of the remaining funds can be budgeted in for the 2021 budget, and then that project would go forward in 2021.
Do we have a heritage designation on every municipal building in this municipality?
Yeah, I think there are 17,
Not on my fire hall.
17 in the
And you will
municipality, and
never.
they're all in Wingham.
Jeez.
Well, it becomes ridiculous, the
Excuse-
requirements.
Excuse me, how many buildings did you say?
I believe there's like 16 or 17, and they're all in Wingham. But some of them are municipal buildings, and some of them are private houses.
Okay, and so then also, we do a number, each year we put $10,000 in the budget to further our asset management plan. And so we've spent about $3,300, and I have another bill coming in from BM Ross for about $4,000 or $5,000, so that will eat all of that up by the end of the year. And so as I said, the sewer and water master plan kind of kicked off another opportunity, I guess you would say, to improve our data. So the last couple of years we've concentrated on improving our data. So with we spent the $100,000 on the camera work, we spent the money this year on the BCAs. Over the last 3 years we spent all that money on the master plan. And so with the camera work, what happened there was our original data for PSAB, BM Ross collected that for us in 2009. So with the camera work, it allowed us the opportunity to go back and review the sanitary, water, and roads to make sure that everything matched. And so in our original data, we found that there was pieces that we didn't have, and through GIS they were reported incorrectly. And so anyway, it was quite an exercise, and I've not finished it yet, but it's going to make sure that our data on a go-forward basis is really good. So I'm pleased that even though I wasn't expecting that extra work, I think it's going to, as I said, move us along. And under the building condition assessment, again, we expect the invoices to come in there. And we are in the administration department also underspent at about $18,000 for travel and training. I expect to spend another 1,000 or 2,000 by the end of the year on some of the courses that we want to take online, but we're still going to be underspent there for sure. So is there any questions on administration before I move on to the next one? Okay, seeing none. So then the next one is police. So basically, again, nothing out of whack on the police. We have participating in that grant program, and so the clerk and Deputy Reeves Sipe Deputy Reeves Sipe is the chair of the board, and that grant program, Wendy Burrows had started that project, and then it's gone through for, I'm not sure of the gentleman who looks after it at this point, but anyway, we have to send in reports all along in order to get the rest of our funding, so I do expect that to come through. And the other portion of the revenue is in this year's budget. We were able to put $60,000 away last year, which we're gonna bring out of reserves before year end to offset the cost. So nothing out of the ordinary really in the police section. It's just, as I said, timing. So anything that anyone wants to ask or ask Trevor about the police?
The grant stuff is done now by the detachment commander and Sergeant David Cinco from the OPP. They, with the support of the clerk, they get the paperwork submitted, and I think I just got one this past week that says we need to finalize and get it sent in, so it should be looked after. Donna, did you have a chance to look at that letter, that the reconciliation for the OPP? Was it around 120,000?
I think it was about 114 or something like that. So I had forwarded both of those to Carson, both for Wingham and for the 5.1, which covers Blythe and East Wallinash. So Carson, I believe you're
Yeah,
putting them,
those will appear on the consent agenda at the next council meeting.
okay, perfect, thank you.
And that was a reconciliation for 2018, correct?
19.
19, that's good, less than a year.
No, pardon me, let me think for a second.
I think it's 18.
Yes, 18, you're right,
Okay.
correct, sorry.
I didn't figure the government was that quick.
No, not that quick, that's correct. Okay, thank you. Okay, so next we're gonna move in, I think we can still get the fire departments done, before we break for lunch for a few minutes, so, I'll turn it over to our fire chief, Marty, and you just kinda give me the nod when you want me to change the slides. Marty.
Okay, thanks, Donna. So once again, the fire wages, the fire calls, a hard one to predict when the calls are gonna happen and where they're gonna happen. However, they're pretty much on target. If they are overspent, they'll be balanced out with the revenue coming in from the other municipalities on that. So the fire calls, I split them up between municipalities, so that's the next slide. So as you can see, North Huron, Centre Huron, ACW are all on target. Morris Turnberry is a little overspent, again, just because of where the calls are and the type of calls that happen.
So Marty, if
the
you
o-
could just refresh my memory, when you say overspent, then they'll get an extra bill for that? Or just works out in the wash?
It works out, like, so whatever calls that happen in their municipality, they pay for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
So that really doesn't affect ours.
bottom line.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
And just to add to that further then, Marty, right now, we're in pretty good shape, but you said we're going to have, once we reconcile to the end of the year for North Huron, we've had a couple of big ones that'll probably eat this up. But what our practice is because the fire calls can fluctuate so much, for the North Huron portion, we budget the $50,000, but if we are underspent, then we do have started a reserve because some other year we're gonna be way over, so it just gives us a bit of a buffer, so.
Go ahead, Kevin?
Through you, Reed.
The call allotment, does that include medical as well?
Yes, that's all calls.
All calls?
Yes.
So municipalities pay for both?
Yes.
Okay.
And just to note, the mutual aid expense, that one is absorbed throughout the entire budget, so everybody pays their percentage that they normally would, so. Okay, just a couple other little notes for the account lines. Again, travel training workshops, we are also down, underspent in that. No conferences or workshops were attended. We did start our firefighter 1 training program this fall, so there'll be a few expenses in there, and we do have some training props that we're going to purchase to use some of that funds up. It'll also help us offset another account that we've overspent, so.
Go ahead, Trevor.
Marty, from that perspective, because of the training that's required due to COVID, there's no risk to like any of our members to not be registered or not to have the proper training to be out out in the community doing firefighting?
No, we have continued all along with our regular practices, training nights.
Okay.
So that keeps us, if you wanna say, up to date. The ones like, the new ones coming on that have to get certified,
Mm-hmm.
that's what we've just started this fall.
Thank you.
And the college is also, the fire college is also starting to do the virtual stuff as well, so. The courses are available, it's just the travel and accommodations, like Donna mentioned, are down. Okay, the materials, supplies, this one is under as well right now, but we do have some purchases to be made, and this will be close to the budget amount come year end. As I mentioned, the equipment,
repair maintenance, this one's overspent, due to our unforeseen repairs that we, had to make to ladder 2. As you can see, I've listed them there and the total amount that, we had to spend for that, and that was all, unforeseen, as I mentioned, so, that's why that account's just a little overspent. It's right now, it's currently overspent by about a couple $1,000. But there are still some repairs and things that have to be made, so. But as I mentioned before, that should be offset, with some of the underspent accounts. The Wingham and Bly station budgets, this one, Sean did the budgeting for this one, and I'm not really sure his rationale on some of the stuff, so Jamie and I are gonna sit down this fall and kind of sort things out and get a better handle on those. But I think they're fairly close overall. They're gonna be under budget, but so we'll get a better handle on that, and moving forward we'll be able to budget appropriately.
So, and some of that was because what happens at the new building is, so it's 60%, all the utilities are, and everything else for the building per se, is split 60% fire and 40% public works. And so then the 60% is shared with the partners, and so then, at the end of the year, reconciliation with the partners will reflect if that portion of the building is underspent. But then on our portion of the building for public works, that's where Jamie and Marty, and I'll help if needed, we'll sit down and try to figure out. It was hard to know what the expenses for that new building was gonna be, pardon me. So we have a bit of a better idea what the heat and hydro and stuff is gonna be now, so, although even though you moved in it partway through the year, we can figure out, you know, based on that, how much the expenses are gonna be. Okay, and then FPO then?
Yeah, the FPO and the North Huron only, that's on target, nothing really, shows on that one. The overall fire budget, looks pretty good and should be in good shape.
Marty, if you don't mind me asking, you just said the fire prevention officer is North Huron only, he doesn't do prevention in other areas?
No, he's a shared service as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's a shared service with Huron East, okay? Huron East has an agreement with Morris Turnberry, so in essence, he does North Huron, Morris Turnberry, and Huron East.
So just to clarify that, Reeve, is that we have a category, the name's maybe not that great, but FPO and North Huron only. So we have a separate budget because there are items such as the loan payments on, the loan payments that we continue to make when the fire boards were bought out back in 2009. So we have to continue to make those loan payments for a number of years, and so the partners do not pay on that. And then there's also a number of things to do with the building and such the partners don't pay for. So then those items go through this FPO and North Huron only budget, so that what the partners pay is completely clear, and Marty doesn't have to try to root out any of those sorts of things. And as I said, for the partners, back when it was all mixed together, and I would send them the reconciliations, it was harder to understand. So anyway, we've completely moved all that out, and it's tracked separately for clarity.
And as far as I'm concerned, I think the new agreements, the way they're structured now is working out well. Haven't heard any feedback, negative or whatever, so. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're at about 25 after 12, and then we're about to launch into Jamie's section, which is a number of slides. So is it appropriate to break for lunch for a few moments?
Oh, yeah, I think it is.
Okay.
Sorry, I wake somebody up.
Oh, are you okay over there?
Recess.
Did I wake somebody up?
So, what would you like to do? Would you like to break for a few moments and get your lunch and have a few minutes, but try to be carrying back on by 1?
You're not supplying lunch?
Yes, right there.
Okay, I was gonna go, I'll need more than a few minutes, I live way the other end of town.
No,
It's not Toronto, Reeve.
The girls have the time set up right.
Yeah,
If
so
I'm
you'll,
not back by 3, continue on.
you'll wanna pass a motion to recess until 1 then.
Could I have a mover to pass a motion to recess till 1 o'clock? I have Trevor, I have Paul, all in favor, carries.